Scientology, A History of Man. A list and description of the principal incidents to be found in a human being. By L. Ron Hubbard. Preface. This is Technique 88. Technique 88 is the process of locating the thetan, the I of the individual, and the auditing of the thetan. Technique 88 depends upon a knowledge of Technique 80, which is a mechanical process applicable to any thought or thought mechanism. Tapes on Technique 80, lectures available as The Route to Infinity, are in the hands of your local organization. The data is being compiled and published as fast as possible. Technique 88 is an incredible advance over past understanding and obtains incredibly fast results. This does not mean that it is, at first glance, credible. You will discover that all of it is true as soon as you give it a try. Technique 88 is an e-meter technique. You can try 88 without an e-meter for present life material. An e-meter is essential for a complete theta clearing. Archimedes, when he discovered how to measure the specific gravity of metals, may have run about shouting, "Eureka!" I am not going to shout Eureka. I am simply going to tell you to get busy now with this technique and produce its minimum, a messed clear. We need them. We can use a couple thousand by fall. This one really has found it. So all I'm going to say is, you've got it now. Let's get this show on the road. That isn't Greek. It's a call to action. L. Ron Hubbard, June 1952. Introduction. This is a cold-blooded and factual account of your last 76 trillion years. The test of any knowledge is its usefulness. Does it make one happier or more able? By it and with it can he better achieve his goals? This is useful knowledge. With it the blind again see, the lame walk, the ill recover, the insane become sane, and the sane become saner. By its use, the 1,000 abilities man has sought to recover become his once more. Like all useful knowledge, it was hardly won. I began search into the backtrack of mankind some years ago. There was no actual knowledge of it in existence. There were numberless superstitions, countless guesses, as many theories in favor of one thing as in favor of another. People believed, some of them, that man had lived before. They had no proof. Others believed that man was born innocent and died and went to a place called hell. Most believed that when you had lived once, that was all, fellow. Such a number of conflicting theories must have truth in them. It became my business to discover, against considerable odds, that truth. In the first place, there was something wrong with man. An animal such as a cat, even a reptile, a lizard, had habit patterns which carried him through his early days. Not man. Why not? As usual, a lot of vagueness answered this. The very schools of thought that said man was just another animal bogged utterly on why it was that babies, the young of this very intelligent animal, are much more stupid than kittens. That was only one thing wrong with man that wasn't explained. The further one investigated, the more one came to understand that here, in this creature Homo sapiens, were entirely too many unknowns. People who suddenly, out of no observable training, begin to speak foreign tongues. Men who seem to remember having been here before. Strange yearnings in people for various parts of the country or the world or the stars of which they have no actual knowledge. Such things are routine puzzles. And there was a much more important thing at work than mere curiosity. Now and then in my auditing I would discover a case which would be extremely reluctant to recover, and then would recover only partially so long as I used data from the current lifetime of the pre-clear. But as soon as I used the whole span of the time track, about 76 trillion years, I could obtain immediate response. One must be very impartial, even brutal, in investigation. The last series of cases I audited, 20 in number, chosen at random from various life strata and suffering from mental and physical ills which were extremely varied, were audited to demonstrate finally to myself one thing only. Can an auditor obtain a swift recovery by auditing the current lifetime only? I used the most modern of techniques, 1952, and did a standard auditing address to the current lifetime of each one. I obtained mediocre results, partial recoveries, slight betterment in attitude. Then I audited each case addressing only past track prior to this lifetime. The results were swift and spectacular. Thus, I validated for myself the reality that in auditing the whole track, one can obtain excellent results, that in auditing the current lifetime, one can obtain slow and mediocre results. From this series came this conclusion. The auditor who insists on auditing the current lifetime only when he has the whole track technique available is wasting time and effort and is, in fact, swindling his pre-clear. I announced whole track techniques to a large number of auditors. I found the better auditors quite willing to use them, and these immediately began to obtain miracle-level results. A very few held back, were very cautious, would not employ the whole track, clung to this lifetime, invalidated the e-meter, invalidated what they erroneously called past lives, were scathingly critical of my employing such data. So, I investigated the auditors. Several of these were given sessions by me. I found several noteworthy similarities about them. They were so low in tone it was almost impossible to get them to register on an old-style Matheson. Their cases were utterly bogged. They generally made a practice of refusing any auditing. Their general record with pre-clears was very poor. Their own lives were running badly. They not only fought past lives, as they called whole track, but they fought any technique evolved since the summer of 1950 or used later techniques poorly. They would not run any overt acts, even in this lifetime. They needed, so far as their cases were concerned, the most careful auditing. I found two people, not auditors, who objected violently to past lives and who were wide-open cases. Both were in the inaccessible band. Both had unsavory social records. Both protested being audited in any incident of any kind. I concluded, therefore, that the relatively sane are capable of accepting evidence and the insane are not. Occasionally, people have told me that I should not release the data contained in this volume because there would be a repercussion throughout the country which would ruin Dianetics forever. Oddly enough, I've been unable to discover this repercussion. I have found people alert and friendly toward this data. Whole track is evidently much more acceptable than the idea of a prenatal. And witness a recent Reader's Digest. Even the medical profession is accepting prenatals. Further, it is very hard to argue with a miracle. Today, Eleanor has arthritis. She is audited whole track with 1952 techniques. Tonight, she doesn't have arthritis. Miracles using whole track are plentiful. By using this data, an auditor can obtain a messed clear rather easily. But the best argument which can be advanced for whole track is that it is factual. By using this knowledge, more is obtained than auditing results. A pre-clear suddenly recovers the ability, carefully learned 80 years ago, to play a piano. An electronics engineer doing poorly before suddenly wraps up formulas that would puzzle Einstein and which may get man off Earth. And 1,000 details in 100 sciences become clear. The search of this track began some years ago and was conducted sporadically on many pre-clears. Various instruments such as the electroencephalograph and the police lie detector were used to further this search, but these were inadequate and limited for my purposes. Finally, Volney Matheson applied his electronic genius to the problem and invented the electropsychometer. This instrument had a range and ability greatly in excess of anything before known. It compares to itself only in the field of physioelectrical mensuration and to existing devices as the electronic microscope compares to looking through a quartz stone. As soon as this instrument was turned loose on the problem ceased to exist. By adding up and checking probabilities on scores of persons, the character, extent, and content of the whole track were mapped. Once the e-meter gave reliable data, the main problem became the estimation of intentions, of sources, of the reasons behind the reasons. Most of this work has been done. It comments poorly on man's dullness that this project was impeded and slowed greatly by lack of funds and by very active efforts on the part of some to acquire and own the copyrights of Dianetics. May the ill of the world forgive them. Thus the map is not as complete in this issue as it might be. This work is honest research, done with considerable care, and it will bear up under survey by any competent auditor or investigator. The most amusing aspect of the whole track is that this work bears up under the onslaught of police lie detector experts. These, hard-eyed and uncompromising, become startled half out of their wits to discover that some of the crimes they find on their machines were committed 2 or 3 lives ago by the criminal under test, and that, most alarmingly, the crimes so discovered are discoverable again to the last detail in the police archives. This is very upsetting to these operators, to be informed so bluntly that man lives many years, not 70, and that today's lifer may again be on their hands tomorrow as a juvenile delinquent. Gravestones, ancient vital statistics, old diplomas, and medals will verify in every detail the validity of many lifetimes. Your e-meter will tell you. Chapter 1. How and what to audit. There are 2 general problems in processing pre-clears. The first is how to audit. The second is what to audit. The present volume presupposes that the skill necessary to the first problem has been mastered, and there is good reason why this should be the case, for the present techniques of Dianetics are far from difficult. Technique 80, to all intents and purposes, putting the finishing touches on the knowledge necessary to handle thought. A study of how to audit embraces thought, emotion, and effort, counter-thought, counter-emotion, and counter-effort, the 3 actions of energy, the behavior of attention units, the anatomy of maybe, and a general knowledge of the background of Dianetics. Elementary group courses exist which, coupled with book study and, if possible, study with a college associate, give one all the insight and skill necessary to accomplish results. What to audit is covered in some degree in other literature such as Science of Survival and the first volume of Dianetics, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, as well as Advanced Procedure and Axioms. The current work is, however, the first coverage of all general categories. It is written to be used in connection with electropsychometric auditing and the individual track map, companion pieces of this present volume. There are 4 general fields of incidents, 4 areas of past embraced in this work. These are 1. Present life, from preconception to present time. 2. The genetic line, being the evolutionary chain on Earth. 3. Large, specialized segments of the whole track. 4. The theta body line, or whole track. Of the 4, only the last is actually capable of producing the clear with any rapidity. However, the auditor should be familiar with all these lines. They are taken one by one in the above order in this volume. All incidents in this volume should be detected and audited with the assistance of an e-meter. If it were not for the e-meter, these incidents would have remained undetected except in the haziest state. Without an e-meter, they cannot be audited with security or even safety for the pre-clear. How to audit and what to audit together deserve considerable study. Certainly, they deserve more study than one would give American history or English or arithmetic, for they deliver a greater dividend to the individual. Studying these incidents may be discovered to be restimulative to the student. If so, he would find auditing them as restimulative. However, such restimulation is very easily resolved, and unless he feels close to the end of tolerance, he should not be shy of auditing or studying the track. Chapter 2. Cases. Targets of address. Several targets present themselves in a case, and any one of them can be audited with some profit. The complexity of the problem of human behavior was a complexity of factors, not an unresolvable mass of twine. Once these factors are each one known and identified, very little trouble is experienced. Thought, emotion, effort, counter-thought, counter-emotion, counter-effort, motivator attention units, overt attention units, DEAD, DED attention units, and their manifestation on the various tone scale charts are the sum and total of factors to be audited out of any one target. Each and every auditing target contains these factors, is audited in the same way, has the same basic behavior pattern, and succumbs to such auditing. It does not matter what target one is addressing in a case. He will not discover wild or unexplained manifestations in how he audits that target. Each one, in short, is made up of the same woof and warp. Each one is basically theta. Theta behaves and manifests in a constant manner, no matter what form it takes. Thus, the auditor should quiet any apprehension he has that something he is auditing is behaving differently than a standard item. Variables, so far as has been discovered, do not exist in theta since the discoveries of Dianetics. There are several targets for the auditor. If he understands thoroughly what they are, his chances of mistaking one kind of incident for another are much reduced. They are in their order of magnitude, not their importance. Cellular injuries. Cellular injuries comprise the first target. A cell is a living animal all by itself. The most necessary auditing on cellular injuries is the emergency assist, wherein the auditor repairs an accident, a burn, an incident which has just occurred. The auditor will find that in auditing a cellular injury which has just occurred, the somatics are very sharp and far more painful than when auditing a standard facsimile. Cellular injuries are audited no differently than any other kind of incident. However, it must be remarked that individual cells have past lives, the easiest manifestation of past lives to check. An auditor can follow a particular cell throughout its own generations within the body, and, as part of the evolutionary line, discover many injuries to it. Further, in going back on the evolutionary line and auditing an injury to a single cell, the future positions of that cell are easily located in the body from there to the present, for the future injuries blow off like small sparks of pain when the basic injury is released. The migrations of a single cell throughout the body are very easy to track in this fashion, and ordinarily check against standard suppositions in the field of physical biology. The pulp of a tooth, for instance, tracks back, cell by cell, to early engrams. When these are relieved, a toothache in that tooth becomes almost impossible no matter how many nerves are exposed, a matter which brings about quite a revolution in dentistry. Cellular injuries do not require any special kind of auditing, and they comprise no special kind of injury, nor are there psychosomatics which demand that the cells alone be audited. Genetic entity. Genetic entity, the GE, is the second area of address. This is the entity which carries forward from the earliest formation of the messed body. It is this entity which has the genetic line engrams. It is located more or less in the center of the body, the stomach, but it is actually a composite of all the cellular experience on the line. It has the manifestation of a single identity. It was formerly referred to as the somatic mind. See Dianetics, the modern science of mental health. Out of all the past experience of the messed body, it makes up a form, a working carbon-oxygen engine. It has no real personality. It is not the I of the body. It has a record, in many cases, of the entire experience forward until the last life. The GE has the record of past deaths. Auditing it alters physical structure, eradicates physical malformations. But these can be otherwise changed by auditing the theta being. The GE facsimiles include a transfer of somatics from past theta beings, for it is not common for a GE to have the same theta being twice. The GE is the constant and continual workhorse of the theta body. It regulates the heartbeat, takes care of all such responses, acts as a stimulus response mind to avoid pain and discover pleasure, and keeps the body running in general. A GE departs from the body much later than the theta beings abandon one, sees it through the death to the end, and only then leaves to join the line once more some 2 or 3 days before conception. This is the mind of an animal, a dog or a cat or a cow. Injected entities. Injected entities are the third class of target. These are actually synthetics. They are ridges that think. They form a very complex pattern. They have geographical areas in the body. These areas are standard, preclear to preclear. These areas answer up on an e-meter like actual minds rather than compartments of a mind. The areas are the center, forehead and down, the right inside, from the edge of the jaw halfway out to the shoulder, the right outside, from halfway to the shoulder to the point of the shoulder, the left inside, opposite from the right inside, the left outside, opposite from the right outside, the stomach entity, located in the area of the solar plexus, plus various other entities held in by these basic entities. These entities run off their own past deaths on other tracks, hold sections of the body paralyzed, bar areas from being audited, withhold information from I, and do other mischief. They are actually the basis of demon circuits, as covered in Dianetics, the modern science of mental health, and they mirror the personality of persons antipathetic to the pre-clear. They are entirely stimulus response. Each one has, from pre-clear to pre-clear, the same personality in the same body position. The right inside, for instance, answers up to the name of crew chief. They are male and female. Their source is probably a softened-up theta being, and they disappear when electronic incidents are audited. Prior to their disappearance, they can exhibit a wonderful and awesome role in confusing the pre-clear. The auditor can move the attention of the pre-clear into one of these and audit it through a death or painful experience, and so bring it up to present time. In view of the fact that auditing basic electronic incidents eradicates them, little attention need be paid to them by the auditor beyond knowing that they are there, that they are the mysterious voices in the heads of some pre-clears, that they make critical or commanding remarks to him and serve, in general, as a fine source of aberration. Paralysis, anxiety stomachs, arthritis, and many ills and aberrations have been relieved by auditing them. An e-meter shows them up and makes them confess their misdeeds. They are probably just compartments of the mind which, cut off, begin to act as though they were persons. Here is an inexhaustible source of study and speculation which I leave to another, having located the method of wiping them out without paying any attention to them. Theta beings. Theta beings are the fourth and only really important target for the auditor. The theta being is the I. It is who the pre-clear is. If all the entities and beingnesses of the pre-clear were hydrogen balloons locked up inside him, and each had a name and identity, the auditor might be confused, and the pre-clear is confused, as to who I is. But if the pre-clear were suddenly opened and the balloons let loose, the I balloon would float free, clear and unmistakable. And that I balloon would be the theta being. It would be who the pre-clear always thought he was anyway. All others are simply modifiers. The theta being does not get lost. It does not go away. It cannot be stolen. If it went away, the pre-clear would be with it and be it. The vagueness of personal identity is caused by the confusion of the theta being, not its inextricable tanglement with other identities. The theta being can be confused in itself. It can be hypnotized. It can go to sleep. It can experience emotions. It can think. It can feel pain. It is immortal in that it cannot die, but it could possibly become so burdened with facsimiles that it could not continue along with bodies. It does not need a body to think, make facsimiles, experience emotions, remember, or perceive. The theta being seems natively capable of producing considerable MEST energy. Facsimiles alone inhibit this ability, whereas it has come to feel, in association with the bad company of genetic entities and the MEST universe, that it is a stimulus-response thing. It is quite capable of generating thought independently of previous effort, counter-effort, or experience. The pre-clear is not guarding or harboring or hiding his theta being. He is his theta being. A relaxed understanding of this will prevent a considerable confusion on the part of the auditor and pre-clear. If the pre-clear is responding rationally, he is the theta being responding. As the theta being can be put to sleep, it is possible to bring then to the surface a GE or another entity which, using the motor controls of the body, can talk or experience. But the individual himself is not usually aware of what happened then. The various strange multi-personality manifestations of the mind are occasioned by valences and their basics, the entities. Ordinarily, unless the pre-clear is obviously insane, these subpersonalities are not distinctly units in themselves, but only color the activities of the theta being. Hypnotism is the process of bringing into being the GE or other entity by putting the theta being into unconsciousness. Self-hypnosis is the process of the theta being hypnotizing the GE or other entity and setting up a compulsive or inhibitive circuit with it. The auditor must know that the existence of a MEST body within the fields of the theta being is incidental and even unfortunate for processing, which, in the absence of a body, goes much faster. The theta being is both outside and inside the mest body. It is not just inside. The only reason it is inside at all is that any field would penetrate the mest body. The mest body should not be thought of as a harbor or vessel for the theta being. A better example would be a sliver inserted unwantedly in the thumb, where the thumb would be the theta being, the mest body, the sliver. Mest bodies are good identification tags. They generate exciting emotions. They are fun to operate at times, but they are no end of existence. A theta being, with its alertness restored, is capable of remolding the human body within its field, taking off weight here, restoring it there, changing appearance, and even height. The body can also be altered by auditing cells or the GE. All in all, bodies are very easy to handle where their condition is concerned. The question is, rather, are they practical? The theta being can evidently manufacture bodies or a reasonable facsimile thereof, which, while they do not labor, neither do they have to be fed. To a society quite mad on the subject of mest bodies, very aberrated on care of the body, the foregoing may seem a trifle strange, and one might think the writer had, to be short, slipped a cable or two in his wits. Indeed, it is very probable that critics may say so, for their reality is entirely outraged by such sudden statements. But this matter has been under investigation for a year and a half, as witness Theta Clear on the Science of Survival tone scale chart which I drew in January 1951. It states that the capabilities of a Theta Clear were unknown. Now they are not so unknown, and while there is much to learn about them still, much can be stated concerning them as clear fact. Back of these statements is a 2-year public record of making statements which, under grueling investigation by others, turn out to be exactly what they were said to be. Before turning away from the above, try Technique 88 and learn again what it is to be truly free. An hour's auditing will prove it. Chapter 3. The Present Life. The present life is always of considerable interest to the pre-clear. In the first place, he is continuing to live in the environment and society, usually, in which he is being audited. He must still face situations which the auditor will discover. The dramatis personae of this period are, to some extent, still living, or their artifacts are yet in plain view. In the second place, the pre-clear is still connected to these incidents by the identifying label of his present life name, and he is continually called by this label and has it confused with himself. In the third place, these facsimiles have not been invalidated by the shock of a death and the helpful hands of the Between Lives crew, and so are normally visible. Fourthly, in this life we have the combination of the current genetic being and the current theta being, and their struggle to even the harsh roadway of living and their divergence of goals. Present life, or any life that comes to view, should be to some extent cleared up for the pre-clear. This is very swiftly done with symbological processing, a volume of recent issue for use in counseling, or with an application of Technique 80 to this life, or any life. Lives are, to some extent, units in themselves. This is caused by the fact that each life, while the pre-clear has been with body, is lived with a different basic team. The genetic being carries on through the evolutionary line, parallel with the protoplasmic line, generation to generation, usually on the same planet, in this case, Earth. The theta being comes into the line from various quarters and each time usually enters an entirely different GE line. Any one life, then, is lived with a different GE. The pre-clear is always and always was and always will be the theta being. But the theta being has, life to life, a different GE. The character and quality of the mest body, then, is different in each lifetime. The past of the mest body in each lifetime is different from the viewpoint of the theta being. Thus, the theta being has variation of experience which is not always, life to life, the same pattern. Thus, when lives come to view, they should be explored and audited as above. A few hours spent in this can materially assist a recovery. The present life is important out of proportion to the small fraction of total age of the theta being. The auditor will find himself, in most cases, compelled to spend many hours upon it, but he should not audit any heavy incidents in the present lifetime. These have basics which reduce much more swiftly, and these basics are always earlier by many ages. The time spent on the present life earlier in Dianetics was very great. It required scores or hundreds of hours of auditing to achieve optimum results. And then, only with great cunning could the auditor achieve his goal. Swifter techniques made present life much easier to audit, cut down the time required, and increase the results. But the same results can be achieved much more swiftly, with much less skill and cunning, when one audits whole track, meaning the track of the theta being. Just as medical science has accepted prenatal experience, according to their best heralds, the popular magazines such as Coronet and Reader's Digest, prenatals fade into the obscurity of curiosa in Dianetics. Great as the results were which occurred when one audited prenatals, results in the same time are now so incomparably greater in auditing the whole track, or even in using Technique 80, that one need know very little about prenatals. In the first place, it has been discovered that prenatals happen to the GE, not the theta being. These recordings are so phonograph record-like because they are wholly in the somatic mind, the GE. They deeply affect the current messed body structure in many ways, but this structure can be otherwise repaired. The genetic entity apparently enters the protoplasm line some 2 days or a week prior to conception. There is some evidence that the GE is actually double, one entering on the sperm side, one entering on the ovum side. If the matter were still important, some time could be spent determining this, for the GE answers dually in present time. The GE continues as the guiding genius throughout prenatal life, building, regulating the heartbeat, and attending to complex structural matters. It records every perception present, asleep or awake, conscious or unconscious, in knockout or drugged sense, to the number of the about 50 perceptions present. Just as the doctor quite often hears a baby in a womb cry, just as he can hear its heartbeat with his stethoscope, so can the child hear what is occurring outside the mother. This is a very important datum from the standpoint of preventive Dianetics, for by knowing it, one can easily forecast the health and mental poise of a child after birth by making certain that it has a good prenatal existence. Psychotics often dramatize, reenact, these prenatal engrams, and a trip through a sanitarium will show an auditor many prenatals in full play, running off like records, ending and starting again endlessly. You get these people out of such dramatization by using Technique 80 with symbols, as in symbological processing, or by directly auditing the overt acts they have done against the family, or if the dramatization is the overt act in full play, auditing the motivator, which is occasionally a prenatal. Here is the list of prenatals. They can be any combination of action known to the business of living, but these are the common ones. Prenatal incidents. All incidents in any environment are prone to be repeated. Thus, these incidents commonly appear in long chains, many incidents in each incident much the same as the last. To audit the chain, one should get the basic on that chain. Coitus chain, father. Coitus chain, lover. Constipation chain. Ordinary bowel chain. Douche chain. Sickness chain, mother's illness. Sickness chain, another member of the family's illness. Work chain, mother's heavy activities at work. Exercise chain, mother's activity in sports or calisthenics. Morning sickness chain. Contraceptive chain. Fight chain, family quarrels. Fight chain, outside the home. High blood pressure chain, mother's high blood pressure. Doctor examination chain, punching mother. Alcohol chain, mother's drinking. Accident chain, mother's falls and bumps. Attempted abortion, surgical. Attempted abortion, douche. Attempted abortion by pressure. Attempted abortion by exercise or jumping. Cough chain, mother's coughing. Cough chain, other members of family. Hiccup chain. Masturbation chain, mother's masturbation. Crying chain, mother's crying. Pre-sperm recordings are quite ordinary. The sperm sequence itself is worthy of note, for it is a race of which the sperm is very conscious. His travails in reaching the ovum are many. There is a visio, which is quite standard of the race. There's quite often a light, a spark in this sequence. The sperm reaches the ovum and merges. This merging is another incident. Conception. Pre-ovum sequences are on record but are not common. The rolling of the ovum down the tube is commonly recorded. Conception and the impulses generated answer the conditions for one type of cancer, embryonic. Mitosis is an incident. Cellular division, once or many times, is on common record. Mitosis answers the conditions for the other type of cancer, malignant cell. Cancer has reportedly been eradicated by auditing out conception and mitosis. The theta being apparently joins the track immediately prior to birth. Its sequence for itself is death, between lives, birth, all in a few minutes according to some findings, a sequence which is quite aberrative. The theta being's joining is called the starter. The theta being sometimes fights away another theta being, sometimes considers this an overt act. You may audit an entire prenatal bank without getting as much rise in the preclear's tone as auditing one starter. For the theta being, after all, is the preclear. Birth is a very aberrative affair, and a difficult or complicated birth can aberrate the entire lifetime of the messed body. But this means that birth should be without conversation in a darkened and quiet room with high humidity and without drafts, not that you should audit births. In other words, one should know how aberrative birth is, but one should not audit birth as a practice. One facsimile 1 has as many as 80,000 births on it as locks. Birth presents itself to be audited much of the time because mother, by complaining of how difficult the preclear's birth was, makes it into an overt act. This overt act had birth as a motivator. Thus, preclears are anxious to have their birth engram audited. Infant and childhood illnesses are important because in them the theta being loses much of the control of the body. The incidents of degradation which precede these, however, are a more important target for the auditor. Most preclears are stuck somewhere on the present life track. The E-meter will tell the auditor where if the auditor asks in terms of years. It is rarely where the preclear thinks it is. Operations, accidents, illnesses are all more or less routine. The auditor should take them as he is given them by the E-meter or symbols, or both. But he should not audit them as such unless he is strongly forced to do so. The incidents on which they depend are so much earlier, so much more aberrative. For every motivator in the present life, there is an overt or a dead. Thus, it behooves the auditor to pay much more attention to using Technique 80 than it does to find new and strange present life incidents to audit. It should not require more than a score of hours to clean up the present life until heavy incidents in the past can be audited. This is true for the neurotic and relatively sane only. It is not true for psychotics. For them, it may be necessary to audit prenatals or use other techniques, and to spend perhaps hundreds of hours of ARC processing to make them entirely sane and stable. Present life incidents by test cannot quickly resolve any case. Audit present life only until one can audit theta line material with safety. Chapter 4. The Genetic Line. The genetic line consists of the total of incidents which have occurred during the evolution of the messed body itself. The composite of these facsimiles has the semblance of a being. This being would be called the genetic entity, or the GE. The GE is not an actual individual, but a composite of individualities assumed in the single lives along the evolutionary track. The discovery of the GE makes it possible at last to vindicate the theory of evolution proposed by Darwin and to discover the various missing connections in the line, as well as to explore the characteristics, goals, and developmental urges of organisms on the evolutionary line. Further, the discovery of the GE makes it possible to adjust hitherto contrary material in the theory of evolution. Darwin and others proposed some scores of years since that an animal body was developed by necessity into successive organisms, each one better adjusted to its environment. The organisms began in simplicity and graduated through successive eons into complexity. Darwin proposed that natural selection was the guiding principle, and that protoplasm, genes, etc. were alone capable of modifying the organism. Later workers proposed ingenious theories of electronic mutation. Prior to these discoveries of Darwin and others, Earthmen accepted various impossibilities as the explanation of the variety of animal forms. The Vedic theories persisted until the early ADs, when a new cult arose in the Middle East, 30 degrees north latitude, 30 degrees to 80 degrees east longitude, Earth, and proposed that animals had been created suddenly from mud by a creator, and that this included man. The Vedic peoples had proposed much earlier that a sort of evolution was responsible for the various forms. Darwin and his co-workers picked up this theory after the Vedic hymns had been transplanted to Europe about a century earlier, concurrent with the French-English conquest of India. Considerable turmoil resulted from the introduction of the Darwinian theories, as these were then in direct contrast with the existing superstition. A trial of a schoolteacher who dared teach the theory of evolution in a backwoods area of the United States resulted in a victory for the superstition, the schoolteacher standing convicted. But evolution received so much publicity over the world as a result that it is now the generally taught theory in schools. However, one should not think of evolution as a standard or precise theory. It is a sprawling and contradictory mass of poorly compiled data, taken from ancient swamps and tar pits, and there are many schools of evolution. These are taught ununiformly in biology classes. Biology is based on cytology, or the study of cells. Existing theory in cytology is quite contradictory to various tenets of evolution. In other words, the field is poorly integrated and badly understood, and not overly gifted with data. The discoveries in Scientology can be addressed to these sciences of biology and cytology with considerable profit. By auditing previously uninformed pre-clears up this evolutionary line, the results are similar, if not identical. The most direct address to altering the shape and form of the messed body of the pre-clear is the auditing of the evolutionary line. Many illnesses, aches, and pains are residual in the body line itself. These are restimulated by the environment or the thoughts and actions of the theta being, and once restimulated, alter the physical condition of the body. However, the body is responsive in present time to the command of a re-strengthened theta being, and the shape and condition of the body can be otherwise changed than by solely addressing the GE. Single or multiple cells respond, each one as though it had its own GE. Very early on the time track, in the area of the photon converter, or the helper, the GE and the cell entity are the same, for here the incidents are single-cell incidents. The theory of the epicenters applies very particularly along the messed evolutionary line. This theory holds that in any given generation on the evolutionary line, the sum of its counter-efforts will form, in the next generation, the new command post. Every central relay point of the nerve system has been at some time or another on the evolutionary line a command post or a subcommand post of the organism. As the organism develops these command posts, each one is subjected to new counter-efforts which form the area of the new command post. Thus, the body has many old command posts from which the somatic mind, or GE, controlled all the responses of the body. The funny bone in the elbow is an old subcommand post, an old epicenter. Any point of reflex response in the body was an old command post or subcommand post. These epicenters stand along the nerve channels of the body and are like switchboards. They still command their immediate areas, and independently of the central command post in the brain can cause reaction in their area. The best example of this, and the most important point for the auditor, is the fact that two separate lines once merged, mollusk, and thereafter worked together as a team. These lines, each one, now has its own command post, its own memory bank. These two lines are the right and left brain lobes. The one in ascendancy ordinarily commands the one in subjugation. The right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. Malcoordination of the two halves of the body can be traced to imbalance or confusion or outright warfare between these two control centers. Half paralysis, stroke, Anesthetized areas can be traced in part to this malcoordination of the present lifetime epicenters. Each one of these goes back as itself along the same track, generation to generation, sharing the same experiences, until one reaches the mollusk or bivalve stage, where each one has a prior and independent and separate history. Either one is capable of controlling the whole body. In the bivalve state, one finds them at war with each other in an effort to attain sole command of the entire bivalve. Right and left-handedness are caused by these malcoordinations of the two lines. Actually, one should be neither right-handed nor left-handed, but ambidextrous. An entire technique, complete within itself, was worked out some months ago when I first encountered these phenomena. This technique has been working so well for some auditors that they wonder why any newer data is introduced. The technique consists of obtaining optimum communication amongst all epicenters in the body, with the result of a complete unity of action by the body. This does a great deal for timing and coordination in general, and has been known to eradicate severe psychosomatic ills. Theta line techniques, being addressed to I rather than to the messed body, produce swifter results. Here is a wealth of material for the investigator. The principal incidents and circumstances on this line have already been located and were located before this data was released the first time. But innumerable structural puzzles are resolved with this data, and few are the pre-clears whose bodies do not react vigorously to the suggestion that some of these incidents may exist, so violent is the charge contained in these incidents. An E-meter has been known to drop as much as 20 dials on the auditor's faint hint of the existence of the helper or the weeper. Life on the evolutionary line is grim, very tooth and claw. So overpoweringly awesome has been life on this line that the violence pervaded the social theory of psychology for decades, and indeed has underlain the most basic philosophies of man's behavior. Here, at the very least, is the explanation for so many theories in the past. It should not be overlooked that on this GE line one finds what the uninitiated call past lives. This continuous living on the part of the somatic mind does not end with the ape. It continues right on through to present time. The GE contains enormous amounts of data about recent times and past times. The GE in America seems to have followed the track of the Western civilizations. This accounts in part for the strange fact that our histories give us enormous treatises on Greece and nothing on Persia, great tomes on Rome and little on Egypt, enormous writings on that small continent Europe, and very little on Asia. A correct track of civilization is not from Phoenicia through Greece, Rome, and Europe to America. It is from China through Chaldea, through Babylonia, through Persia, through Achaia, and minorly through Greece, Rome, and Europe, since these last form a decline from statures much greater than they before them. The American GE enters civilizations at various times and periods. It usually passed through Greece and Rome and Europe, which accounts for our fixation on these minor empires and inferior societies. The point here is that a study of history is very restimulative to the GE and produces body alterations for which the theta being, not having been there usually, cannot account. You, as a theta being, may or may not have seen Greece or Rome. Your messed GE has probably activated a body there, just as it has been, in accordance with Darwin and his Russian copyist, one of the patron saints of the 20th century slave state of Russia, Lysenko, an anthropoid in the deep forests of forgotten continents, or a mollusk seeking to survive on the shores of some lost sea. By the way, if you cannot take a warning, your discussion of these incidents with the uninitiated in Scientology can produce havoc. Should you describe the clam to someone, you may restimulate it in him to the extent of causing severe jaw hinge pain. One such victim, after hearing about a clam death, could not use his jaws for 3 days. Another had to have 2 molars extracted because of the resulting ache. The clam and all these incidents are very much present in the GE and can be restimulated easily. So do not be sadistic with your describing them to people, unless, of course, they belligerently claim that man has no past memory for his evolution. In that event, describe away. It makes believers over and above enriching your friend the dentist, who, indeed, could not exist without these errors and incidents on the evolutionary line. The auditors should know about this line, for it sometimes crosses the theta line, which is to say it is co-experienced in places by the theta being. This is simple to unravel. Also, the pre-clear may have a GE incident in such forceful restimulation that the auditor has no choice but to audit it. When one says GE incident, he means, of course, anything on the entire evolutionary line, including past lives. One must not forget that the theta being has also shared with another, not the present GE, some of these past life experiences. One can discover when the theta being first came to Earth, when it first had a messed body on Earth, and so discover its first contact with some messed body line. It has co-experienced with a GE in every life where it has had a messed body. There are extraterrestrial GEs, perhaps GEs which evolved elsewhere and which are still elsewhere. These GEs would be on the evolutionary line of some other planet. They would not cross into this evolutionary line. But the theta being, where it has had a messed body on some other planet, may have had it in company with a GE there, which had its own peculiarities. One almost never audits such a thing, but it is remarked that it can be there. The following incidents are audited with the usual tools of Dianetics and Scientology with due attention to Technique 80. One may wonder what a clam might consider an overt act. The best way to find out is to put it on the e-meter and ask. Every one of these, when in evidence to be audited, is part of a motivator-overt combination. When they do not react on a meter, when they do not present themselves to be audited, don't bother to go looking for them. If they are to be audited, they will react with violence, as much as a 5 or 20 dial drop on an e-meter. If they drop in such a fashion, there is a companion incident, which is to say that they have motivators where they are overt acts and overt acts where they are motivators. Such a drop means that they are being used in present time as motivators or overt acts. The atom. Lucretius said that each atom was life. This may or may not be true, but the first incident one finds in the GE behaves as though the pre-clear were an atom, complete with electronic rings. This incident audits very poorly until it is located as a companion to some overt act. There seems to be a hole in space immediately ahead of the atom. Just after this hole is a condition of motion, with the pre-clear in the center, with rings of motion traveling around him. Characteristic of this incident is a state of mind wanting no ARC, neither to receive ARC nor to give ARC, wanting no ARC give or take. This is a comfortable aloneness. The pre-clear usually perceives from this his later necessities for ARC on a messed level. The cosmic impact. As physicists tell us, cosmic rays enter the body in large numbers and occasionally explode in the body. Very early on the track, the impact of a cosmic ray and its explosion is very destructive to the existing organism. One is accepting rays and suddenly one explodes. Sometimes one is accepting one while another explodes elsewhere. This has been found fairly basic on an anxiety stomach, on acceptance-rejection confusions. Remember that in all early incidents there is a GE line for the left side of the body and one for the right side, and either one can affect the whole body when it is run. Thus there are atoms for the right and left and cosmic rays for the right and left sides both. The photon converter. All early life is fixated on converting photons to energy. One finds the algae and the plankton taking their living from photons from the sun and minerals from the sea. Because at night there is no sunlight, the photon converter sinks into an apathy which eons later becomes the messed body's craving for sleep. This is a basic problem of no energy received, very little storage for energy. All photon converter incidents are concerned with light and dark, the storms of the sea, the fight to keep from rolling into the surf. The fear of and combat with the merciless surf is characteristic of all early incidents until well after the weeper. Sending the ill to the seashore to listen to surf is a guaranteed restimulator. There are many types of these incidents. A basic one is concerned with fear of sinking, effort to rise, for the photon converter must stay afloat. Past deaths as a photon converter are common, for only by dying and knowing how one died could the GE utilize the chief counter-efforts which menaced. A chain of experience which did not include death would not be able to build efficient organisms and would be unprofitable. Death on the GE line has a very great value and marks progress. Death on the theta line is so much wasted time, hence the quarrel between the GE and the theta being. The helper. The helper is one of the most powerful incidents in terms of charge on the early track. It is actually mitosis, or cell splitting. The GE carries along a tiny cell, mobile and swimming. Suddenly it decides to divide. It starts to split in half. There is usually an enormous struggle in this splitting. One side wants to split, the other usually does not want to split. Having split, one side is energetic and starts to go about its business. Then it sees that the other side is limp and falling toward the mud below the water. The energetic side turns and dives and tries to nudge the other up to the surface, tries to revive it. The failing side may revive. In the incidents you will find, there will be one of two outcomes. The failing side fails despite the other's efforts. The failing side revives, and now all energetic swims away, leaving to his fate the other that helped it, and who is now too weak to live, and so sinks and dies. There are two sides to the helper. The whole sequence of the losing side is present. The whole sequence of the winning side is present. The confusion lies in the fact that each is itself, but a moment ago was the other. There are whole squads of helpers. It is a confusing area for the GE, which therein has much cause for misidentification. The clam. A variety of incidents may intervene between the helper and the weeper. These are the evolution chain which includes jellyfish, seaweed, and some other forms. It is interesting that immobile states are most liable to have heavy incidents. It is also interesting that bulbous seaweed uprooted and cast ashore by storms gave man some of his early experiences with sunlight in the absence of water. A distinct somatic of drying and itching is felt by pre-clears when they encounter this incident, a restimulation of the drying outer skin of the dying seaweed. It is also interesting that bulbous seaweed is an early pattern of man's later general form. Jellyfish incidents are quite remarkable for their occasional aberrative force. The jellyfish sometimes drifts into a cave or grotto and is pressed against the stone by rising tide and waves, thus gaining the first facsimiles which later become a shell, as in the clam. Here is an example of the principle of counter-efforts molding the physical shape and necessities of life forms. The clam is a deadly incident, but mostly when restimulated on purpose. Although this area of the track is called the clam, it is improbable that the actual animal was a clam such as our razorbacks. Visios on this seem to indicate that it is a scalloped lip, white-shelled creature. The clam was, of course, quite thoroughly fixed to the rocks, and the state is very static. The clam had many troubles. The first of these troubles is the double hinge problem. One hinge wishes to stay open, the other tries to close. Thus, conflict occurs. Here we have two control centers, both of them more or less equal in power, having no internal communication. In the jellyfish, we have the first third dynamic engrams, where the goal is to hold together at all costs. As soon as the hinges are formed in the clam, we have our first efforts to be completely contrary and internally at war. The solution occurs when one hinge goes into apathy and the other assumes complete control. The hinge epicenters later become the hinges of the human jaw. Should you desire to confirm this, describe to some uninitiated person the death of a clam without saying what you are describing. Can you imagine a clam sitting on the beach, opening and closing its shell very rapidly? Make a motion with your thumb and forefinger of a rapid opening and closing. The victim may grip his jaws with his hand and feel quite upset. He may even have to have a few teeth pulled. At the very least, he will argue as to whether or not the shell stays open at the end or closed. And he will, with no hint of the death aspect of it, talk about the poor clam, and he will feel quite sad emotionally. The clam had an astonishing number of adventures for so minor a creature. It would get things into its shell and be unable to get them out. It would get its shell stuck open and be unable to shut it. And it would come loose from its rocks under the surface of the water and get tossed into the broil of the surf. And it would become deserted by the tide and left to bake under a frying sun, a quite uncomfortable situation which restimulates sometimes in a sunburn. There was or is a spore method of procreation used by the clam. The spore was put on the inside of the lip and permitted to grow. Eventually, it became large enough to become a clam on its own and would depart. There is a guardian emotion on the part of the clam for these spores and a sadness on their departure. But there is more to the spore than this. The spore was like a barnacle. When the clam was cast ashore, these spores were still alive in the shell. The sun would kill the inner cells of the barnacle, while the outer shell cells still lived. The dead inner cells would form a gas, which, under the heat, would explode violently, to the agony of the living barnacle shell cells. This bursting was sudden and painful. These spores gave incidents which permitted the human teeth to have a pattern. The ancient bursting engrams are still dramatized by the teeth, which, under stress, burst or feel like bursting. Running out some of these bursting incidents will take the ache out of a tooth rapidly. The fifth nerve channel is around the mouth and is heavy out of all proportion. A nerve channel is as heavy as it has to be to conduit pain away from the area. Thus, I deduced that there must have been much pain in this area and that the fifth channel is the oldest main conduit. And so it is. Audit all such incidents for all teeth, and you have permanently taken the pain out of toothache and cut down decay. By the way, a barnacle, because of this bursting possibility, at length developed a blowout area, a cap which would blow easily. And teeth have such an area. It gives way and makes cavities. The clam had many, many deaths. A scan across its deaths locates the one in restimulation. You will be amazed to find the clam sufficiently advanced as a cellular somatic mind to have postulates, to think thoughts. The clam is actually a group of incidents rather than a single one. The weeper. After leaving the sea, the GE spent 500,000 years on the beach. It had already known about air as a plankton, had known about the beach as seaweed and dying clam, but it nevertheless required some 500,000 years, according to the evolutionists, for the creature to learn to use the land. The plights of the weeper are many and pathetic. Still obtaining its food from the waves, it yet had to breathe. Waves are impetuous and often irregular. The weeper would open up to get food from the water and get a wave in the shell. It would vigorously pump out the water and try to get some air, and then, before it could gulp atmosphere, be hit by another wave. Here was anxiety. Being still a shell animal, the mobility of the weeper is poor. It could not withdraw rapidly nor advance rapidly. Tides went out and left it to bake and thirst. The sand got into it, and it had to pump water swiftly in order to continue to live. The weeper is so called because it had to pump salt water. It was deduced that crying in a human being is very unnatural. Why is it that a human being has to pump out some salt water in order to feel better? Which is to say, why does crying out a grief charge produce such a change in a case? The incident must be one of pumping out salt water, and this is practically the total activity of the weeper, which, living perilously on the edge of the surf, had to pump to eat and to breathe. The creature had 2 pumping tubes. These later became, because they were furthest toward the light, the eyes of the human being. These tubes had very rough treatment, getting full of sand, being battered by surf. The inability of a pre-clear to cry is partly a hang-up in the weeper. He is about to be hit by a wave, has his eyes full of sand, or is frightened about opening his shell because he may be hit. An occluded case is sometimes merely a case of shell shut. Get the pre-clear to imagine that his eyes are in his mouth, looking out. Get him to scan through such a situation. You will find the weeper which he has in restimulation. If you make a pre-clear go through all the physical motions of sobbing convulsively, no matter what his emotion may be, he may connect with the weeper. Belching, gasping, sobbing, choking, shuddering, trembling, are all manifestations of emotional dramatization of the weeper. The weeper, originally called the grim weeper or the boo-hoo, had trillions of misadventures. Scanning over these, the auditor will find the one or two which have remained in restimulation and which are open to auditing. The volcanoes. Earth was undergoing volcanic upheavals during the days of life on the beach. Possibly it was this volcanic action which severed the chain of evolution, for there is a lack of real reason why this evolution should not be continuing on even today. The progress of evolution was cut at the beach, possibly because the beach is peculiarly subject to violence during volcanic upheavals, sea and land being in clash. Now and then the auditor will find a volcanic upheaval incident in restimulation, with its palls of choking sulphurous smoke. It has been suggested that smoking tobacco is a sort of dramatization of volcanoes, which, at the least, were spectacular. The birds. Occasionally, the creatures of the beach, still shell animals, had their troubles with birds, which had become so earlier. Birds of a very crude construction developed a taste for clams. Clams had no adequate defense against them. If a clam opened its shell, the bird would thrust in a beak or a claw. If the clam then closed, the bird would fly up into the air. The clam would let go, drop on a rock, and become bird food. If the clam didn't close, it became bird food anyway. Falling sensations, indecision, and other troubles go with the birds. Sometimes a pre-clear will come up with an incident where he was a bird or even a bat. The auditor should be very careful about what he would call dub-in, for this one belongs not in the GE, but most likely in the theta line, with the pre-clear taking over the body or form of a bird or bat. The incident is quite valid. It does not, however, belong on the GE line. Theta line incidents occasionally restimulate and group with GE incidents. Auditing brings them apart easily. Thus it is in the case of the birds, for theta beings can fly. Being eaten. In that so many fish and animals were equipped with so many teeth, it is inevitable that somebody somewhere on the track would have been eaten. And so it is, for there are a great many being eaten engrams. These minor circumstances are, of course, motivators. The auditor should realize that the GE itself did some eating, and thus there are many of these eating engrams which are motivators. Diet faddists, people who will not eat meat, are hung in maybes on the subject of digesting and being digested. Many strange psychosomatic ills and skin manifestations may be traced to these incidents. Anyone who knows Technique 80 knows that dispersal of energy is a difficult condition to run. The GE, about to be eaten by a fish, suddenly recognizes the fact and his attention units disperse. In fact, he may disperse right off the couch. Few auditors, in the absence of Technique 80, have been able to run being eaten incidents. Knowing about the dispersal of attention units and knowing that this is fear may permit an auditor at last to run and reduce these being eaten incidents. There is a strange compliance on the part of the GE, in some cases, to be eaten. Later on, this may take on the form of compliance in being beaten or abused. Masochism on the GE line may have its seat in such incidents. There is an emotion of being able to at least assist the survival of another body by letting it be fed. Auditing an eating incident consists of requiring the pre-clear to locate the dispersal of his attention units and the center of that dispersal. The attention units may be located far behind the GE in the eating incident and should be traced from there back to the pre-clear until they are reduced. The sloth. There are many steps and incidents between the birds and the sloth. However, they are most of them mobile and few of them are found in high restimulation. With the sloth, we again find the GE in a state which is not very mobile, not easily defensible, in a world where the evolutionary line has produced more developed and more carnivorous beings. Man's line is not very pugnacious. The GE is smarter in man's line than the GEs in other lines, but man's current intelligence comes from an entirely different quarter than evolution. The sloth shows man's nature well, so far as GEs are concerned. Leave me alone and I'll leave you alone is the philosophy here. But the sloth was slow and easily attacked, and he had bad times falling out of trees when hit by snakes, falling off cliffs when attacked by baboons. And the sloth was trying to think. The most pitiful, painful efforts at thinking are found in this series. The sloth is a chain of incidents and misadventures, mostly showing up fear of snakes and of falling. The ape. When man had advanced as far as the ape, he was agile and intelligent. The ape is usually an area of overt acts against animals and incidents of protecting young. The Piltdown Man. Man's first real manhood is found in the Piltdown, a creature not an ape, yet not entirely a man. It is so named not because it is accurately the real Piltdown Man, but because it has some similarity. The Piltdown contains freakish acts of strange logic, of demonstrating dangerousness on one's fellows, of eating one's wife, and other somewhat illogical activities. The Piltdown teeth were enormous, and he was quite careless as to who and what he bit, and often very surprised at the resulting damage. Obsessions about biting, efforts to hide the mouth, and early familial troubles can be found in the Piltdown. It is a wonderful area in which to locate GE overt acts. The Caveman. Keeping women at home for men and keeping a man from keeping one at home for women can be found in the Caveman. Here, one crippled one's woman to keep her there, or poisoned one's man for having kept her there. Marital malaction often goes back to the caveman. Any condition of interpersonal relationships can be found in this area. Jealousy and overt acts around it, strangling, smashing in heads with rocks, quarrels about homes, tribal rebukes, pack instincts can be found in the caveman. Past deaths. It must be kept in mind that past deaths happened to the GE and to the Theta being. Any GE has a regular line of past deaths, coming on forward chronologically. The auditor may have some difficulty locating GE deaths in the last few thousand years because deaths are also registered on the Theta line. The GE under processing may have had hundreds of Theta beings in command of it down the centuries. There is a matter known as the second facsimile, or duplicate facsimile. A Theta being takes a picture of the memory of a GE and carries it as a record. A GE takes a picture of the memories of Theta beings and carries those. Thus there can be many second facsimiles of past deaths for the same period of time. One should not be surprised at discovering 5 past deaths, all occurring in the same span of years. Some will be second facsimiles. A maximum of 2 for that period will be actual incidents. One death happened to the Theta being using another GE line, the other happened to the GE. They will be in different places and at different times. Second facsimiles are photographs of the memories of another. They are still pictures usually. Their characteristic is that they show up with only 2 or 3 pictures of some long-ago situation. As they are pictures of charge and age and everything else, they will show up on an e-meter as charged incidents. But when one tries to audit them, they change into the basic incident, the actual one, the pictures vanishing. The existence of a real facsimile in the GE or the Theta being will restimulate and hold as locks pictures taken from former Theta beings and GEs. Any death registering or any incident registering on an e-meter for a certain period in the GE line tells you that there is a real incident in that area. Hunting for the real one, you may find some of these second facsimiles. These usually evaporate when touched, and the actual incident is quickly found. This matter is mentioned because auditors are sometimes puzzled by shifting dates on an e-meter, or incidents simultaneously occurring where they should not. An auditor, merely by pursuing the matter, automatically sorts out the second facsimiles which may be there and finds the actual facsimiles which must be audited. Contact between a Theta being and a GE must be very intimate for a photograph to be taken of the other's facsimiles, or 2 beings must be in almost hypnotic rapport for the matter to occur. The facsimiles themselves do not shift from one to the other. One being simply sees and makes a picture of the facsimile of another when that other has the facsimile in restimulation. Any auditor has seen his pre-clears incidents. Here is a map showing the relationship of the GE to theta beings. See the audiobook directory. Assumptions. Assumption is the name given to the act of a theta being taking over a mest body. This is occasionally found to be part of the record of the GE, strong enough to be audited. It is the sensation of being taken over thoroughly and sometimes contains the shock of contact. The assumption takes place, in most cases, just prior to birth for every GE generation. Evidently, theta being assumption is recent on Earth. It is rare to find a theta being coming to Earth 35,000 years ago, rarer to find one earlier. 70,000 years ago is the present earliest arrival of a theta being on Earth. In a great many cases, the preclear, for the awareness of the preclear is the theta being, will be found to have arrived on Earth for the first time only a few hundred years ago. E-meter reaction occurs in the GE line on these assumptions, and the auditor should be careful to differentiate whether he is reading for the GE or the preclear himself. The GE takes a poor outlook on assumptions, but in reality it is not much different to the GE to be taken over by a theta being than by a new epicenter developed in the past generation. There is a smothering peculiar to assumption from the viewpoint of the GE, which is followed by a fear of being caught, a desire to hide, a wonderingness at this nothingness which hit him and wrapped him up. Departures. The GE stays with the dying body to the complete end, and then soars upward and obtains a down view of the dead. This is routine, in that the anaton of death deepens as the end nears and goes deeper than in any other incident. An auditor may leave the end of a death unaudited by carelessness. The theta being leaves earlier than the GE, and the GE sometimes records the departure of the theta being before the GE itself departs from the dying. There are conditional departures of both in bad accidents and operations. Chapter 5. The Theta Being. The theta being is the principal target of the auditor. The preclear is the theta being. The main thing wrong with any preclear is that he cannot disentangle himself from entities and somatic entities, from demon circuits and mest bodies. He wants to know who he is and where he is. A common complaint from a preclear is that somebody won't let him be himself. The joke of this is that the preclear doesn't know who himself is, much less why he can't be allowed to be him. Take any preclear using concept running, motivator, overt, and dead, and you will find him instantly in the midst of dozens of engrams if you ask him to run the concepts, I am myself, you are yourself, what is my name, who am I, and similar concepts which attempt to single out his identity. The only reason why a person becomes aberrated about other people is that he cannot distinguish between himself and others. You find preclears and auditors, too, who go around thinking themselves burdened with the facsimiles of others, who become restimulated and then try to run the engrams of others to cool the restimulation. Identification of the real I is the sure cure for identification of self with others and others with others. Who is the preclear? He is the theta being. How does one really deaberrate and clear a preclear? By clearing the theta being. By running genetic entity incidents, by cleaning up present life, by running past deaths, the auditor can get rid of psychosomatics by the bail for the preclear. The auditor can practically rebuild the body. He can clarify thought by taking away pains restimulated by thinking. He can do 1,000 marvels never before possible here on Earth, or anywhere else for that matter. But when he has done all these things, often at great labor, what does he have? He has a composite being good enough to be called Homo novus, a theta-animated mest body possessed of new and desirable attributes. That doesn't mean he has the preclear cleared. That doesn't mean he has located the preclear for the preclear and restored an ultimate self-determinism. It means the auditor has done well. The auditor has made what we are calling a mest clear, a good, sane, rational mest being about a skyscraper higher than Homo sapiens. But in that Homo sapiens is a pretty horrible thing to be, this isn't good enough, not nearly good enough. This Homo novus is limited in his self-determinism by all the economic and social restrictions of an aberrated society. He is not free of food, clothing, or shelter. He dies when you get him too cold. He perishes when the oxygen content drops too low. He is living in a tolerance band which keeps him cramped to the face of one second-rate planet in a 10th-rate system, prey to all the ill will that blows. Is this being free or self-determined? Maybe he is good enough to overlord his fellows into a security for himself never before possible. But that is his only real route toward security. He must fight and command for his 3 squares. He must use police protection in order to keep himself free of bullet holes and bumper marks. Compared to a Homo sapiens, Homo novus is very high and godlike. Compared to a truly self-determined being, Homo novus is an ant ready to die under anybody's misstep. This universe is a rough universe. It is a terrible and deadly universe. Only the strong survive it. Only the ruthless can own it. Given one weak spot, a being cannot long endure it. For this universe will search it out and enlarge it and fester and probe it until that weak spot is a festering wound so large that the being is engulfed by his own sores. Fighting this battle for survival, and fight it he must, a being in the messed universe cannot seem to afford decency or charity or ethics. He cannot afford any weakness, any mercy. The moment he does, he is lost, for he is surrounded by chilled, coarse rock and molten energy, which, no matter the state of aberration of his social surroundings, will engulf him instantly that he ceases to obey the very least laws of Mest. This is a universe of force. It is not a universe of reason. Brutal, unthinking, without decency or mercy, Mest force awaits with punishment any being with any weakness. The possession of a Mest body is a liability, for through that body, the being can be given pain, can be regimented by the routine demands of eating and care from harm, until at the very, very highest, he can be but a puppet dancing to the spin of some unthinking planet under the strong glare of a remote and careless sun. Under these conditions, a being, burdened with the care and liability of a body, made uncertain by an unknowingness, bows to strange and non-existent gods, resorts to terrible makeshifts in lieu of justice, cringes before the mightier bomb, the sharper blade. You have examined an engram. A standard engram is simply the collision of the body with the Mest universe with sufficient impact to produce the confusion of attention known as unconsciousness. Should you care to make a test, just run care of the body as a total therapy. You will discover that by running out the postulates of a pre-clear about his body and its care, and his injunctions and insistences to others that they care for their bodies, you can produce soaring changes in tone. An entire book can be written concerning this therapy. An entire book has been written about it. The first book in Dianetics. This therapy could be styled The Efforts of a Theta Being to Reconcile the Frailty of a Mest Body with the Ethics of a Theta Being. They do not reconcile these two. Schopenhauer, Zeno, and names without number in philosophy have been trying to make this reconciliation for eons. One says, defeat it all and die, for only by dying can you defeat it. Another says, you can't win, therefore the only victory is in refusing to try to win. Christianity and a million other anities have struggled with this problem, and the result is a potpourri of answers, none of which reconcile the problem. You have a soul. It goes off somewhere. You don't know about it. You are a soul. You don't know about it. Today we live in a vast cult called Worship the Body. Medical doctors, school teachers, parents, traffic officers, the whole society unites into this war cry, care for the body. This stems from the ignorance that the body is all that one has, that he will have just one body, that his total devotion is the care of that body. A body is a vegetable. It is not even a sentient vegetable, for it lacks perception in the whole theta range. Like any vegetable, it grows from seed and has habit patterns which help it survive. And like any vegetable, one way or another, it gets used by others. Early theta beings saw Mest bodies acting and being as though they were self-motivated. This was a curiosity. The early theta being did not know that these Mest bodies depended wholly for their wits upon the guidance of a decayed theta being. The bodies looked like entities of considerable force and skill. The theta beingness of them was hidden and unapparent. Thus, even theta beings have been fooled by mest bodies. A mest body, whether it belongs to the race of man or the race of ants, is yet but an animated vegetable. Given a theta being to guide it, it becomes part of a composite such as Homo sapiens. Here we have a theta being decayed into unknowingness, devoted to the care of a mest body. The I of this body, the actual volition of it, all its wits and skills, are theta things derived from the guidance of a theta being. By itself, the body would live, walk around, react, sleep, kill, and direct an existence no better than that of a field mouse or a zombie. Put a theta being over it, and it becomes possessed of ethics and morals and direction and goals and the ability to reason. It becomes this strange thing called Homo sapiens, a being above animals and yet an animal. Give this mest body a psychotic theta being, and you get a sort of Frankenstein's monster. Give this mest body a nearly unconscious theta being, and you get a zombie. The body is a carbon-oxygen engine which runs at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The theta being is the engineer running this engine in a Homo sapiens. There is already an entity running this engine, the GE, but there is here only a total devotion to avoiding pain, seeking survival factors of the meanest sort, begetting new mest bodies. Every cell in that body has its own theta. The GE is theta. A theta being is something else entirely. In the first place, the theta being came into being without the need of a mest body, without the need of motors. It is close to a perpetual motion machine, in that it can create energy and impulses. It thinks without facsimiles, it can act without experience, it can know simply by being. When we have talked of optimum performance in Dianetics or Scientology, we have talked about the actual top-level capabilities of the theta being, not the capabilities of the mest being. Early work in Dianetics treats of the composite called Homo sapiens and treats that composite for what it is, an identity of several parts which act in greater or lesser coordination. You can go right on treating this composite being as a unit. You can go right on treating him and getting results for which you will be praised. But you must know that you are not treating the actual identity when you treat the mest body. You are furthering a composite, and actually you are subscribing to the international cult called Care of the Body. You can, at your own choice, go on living with and processing this composite known as Homo sapiens and create Homo novus. You can use Dianetics to make hitherto impossible strides. But be advised that in this choice you are living with paradoxes which no philosopher in all the ages ever reconciled. The injustice of death, the depravity of human beings, as in Plato, the penalty of assisting another, the impossibility of having good ARC and survival too, the liability of being kind and merciful, and every unanswerable religious paradox known. You, by persisting in yesterday's reality, are persisting then in problems which have never been resolved with the factors accepted. You are demanding of a mest theta composite that he be self-determined when every zephyr from a hard universe contains death for him and can turn him like a top. You are demanding that he be careful when his only salvation is to be carefree. You are saddling him with all the unanswered riddles of an aberrated life in an aberrated world, and you are condemning a pre-clear to the dwindling spiral. For the theta being, as part of the composite, decays fast and soon dies forever in the rigid apathy of mest. Thus this data is given you. In lieu of this data, the only thing which could be given man is the answering salute to the gladiators, they who are about to die. As an auditor, the choice is yours to make, the paradoxes or the answer. I would not give you this data unless it can be demonstrated on any pre-clear with ease. And I would not give it to you unless you needed it. Here it is. Chapter 6. Capabilities of the Theta Being. The capabilities of the Theta Being cannot at this time be set down in a full sweep of data. In the first place, it would be unfair to tomorrow to detail in writing the exact constitution of a Theta Being. For by just that much could he be predicted and brought again into a low state. The auditor does not have to know too much of these full capabilities. The pre-clear will discover them for himself in processing. But there are a few data necessary to auditing, and these are set forth. A theta being is capable of emitting a considerable electronic flow. This is not done by using facsimiles, but is actually a creation of the motion which we now know as electricity. A theta being produces considerable voltage and amperage, enough to give somebody a very bad shock, to put out his eyes or cut him in half. The theta being on his own can instill anything on the emotional range into another being, for each emotion is a wavelength and wave characteristic. A theta being does not use facsimiles to think or act. He does mock-ups of the situation, and by examining the mock-up, knows how something works or what should be done with the situation. His memory is by pervasion, which is to say by pervading again the area of the data, or by approximation. He is not stimulus response. Facsimiles are accumulated by a theta being at will, discarded at will, much as a man collects stamps. Theta beings can rip chains of facsimiles away from other theta beings. This is not done as a therapy, but as an outright prankish theft. The identity of a theta being is not based on his memory of events, but on an actual knowledge of identity. A theta being can be rendered unconscious by wave action. He can be hypnotized. He can be made to sleep. He can be made to possess facsimiles and use them. He can be aberrated in such fashion so as to forget his identity. He is subject to all the laws and rules of thought, emotion, and effort as described in Dianetics and Scientology, with the difference that, fairly clear, he has enormous choice in their use. A theta being can be de-aberrated by ridding him of his chains of facsimiles and restoring to him his knowledge of identity. A theta being can enjoy existence and emotional impact. He can plan and act. His activities lie above 8.0 on the tone scale. He is very high aesthetically and devotes most of his time to aesthetics. Theta beings associate socially with theta beings and have a high sense of justice. A theta being can be made visible by certain electronic flows. He can be pinned down by certain flows. The wavelengths of these flows are not known to Homo sapiens at this time, and methods of emission of them have not been invented on Earth. Mest beings of the class of Homo sapiens are composite beings, motivated by a theta being, entities, the GE, and the environment. Mest beings, fallen away from being theta beings, incapable of regaining a theta state in the absence of Dianetics, dislike theta beings, whom we will call thetans from here on, meaning a theta being who has not been forced to have a mest body. Mest beings, trying to inhabit an area of thetans, are commonly balked and fought by the thetans. And the mest beings then begin to trap and harass the thetans, and will use them to motivate new bodies when the thetans have been reduced to little or nothing in power. The they, which you will discover in incidents, are mest beings. The current Homo sapiens is a they. Mest beings, amnesia and a mest body, attack thetans who menace them. Thetans can kill mest bodies by throwing a charge at them. Thus, a war develops between thetans and mest beings. Given electronics and hitherto unconquered thetans, mest beings can and have won. Thetans communicate by telepathy. They can move material objects by throwing an energy flow at them. They can travel at very high speeds. They are not bound by atmospheres or temperatures. Thetans quarrel with each other by showing each other facsimiles or throwing energy flows at each other, but they are not very quarrelsome. Thetans do not die. They grow in that there are young and old thetans. Decaying, they obtain mest bodies and eventually pass out in the form of a solid, apathetic slumber. A thetan can feel pain. He can be crippled and dismembered, but this requires force which would blow half a town off the map. Thetans live on some planets. They consider these to be outside the mest universe, by which they mean outside areas inhabited by the composite beings, the races which use electronics and need bodies. A thetan, brought low enough to have a mest body, may consider that he has been trapped by time warps, or that his universe is another dimension, or some such thing. This is not the case. Thetans live in the same time stream, with the difference that they can alter concepts of time and get future or past at will. It is the thetan who is altering his concept, not the time that is changing. So don't go off on wild chases after fourth and fifth dimensions, time warps, and other time-space universes. Teleportation makes it look like these exist for the Thetan. There is more to this, but you don't really need it in processing. There are two states of theta clear. One of these is a cleared Thetan, from whom all incidents would be removed. The other is the Thetan cleared of a necessity to have a messed body. When we say theta clear, we mean the latter. A Thetan is somewhat bound in here on Earth because of the existence of other system forces. Probably with a few Thetans active, this planet will be much less calm and orderly. Probably Homo sapiens will use electronics someday to re-trap Thetans who are bothering him. But if Homo sapiens has the techniques for getting free himself, some miracle might avert this. Possibly a handful of Thetans will someday become alarmed at the worries and efforts of Homo sapiens and try to throw the remaining race into a super-controlled slavery. All that is speculation, but it is not a speculation that life will become much more interesting on this planet. It is doubtful if the Thetans will pull off the ultimate trick, simply knocking out the atmosphere of the planet that clears everybody after a fashion. There is nothing as wild in the books of man as will probably happen here on Earth. And it will happen, and be allowed to happen, simply because all this is so incredible that nobody will even think of stopping it until it is far, far too late. Its incredibility is its best safeguard, so you needn't bother to convince anybody who doesn't want to believe it. It took the medical profession 2.5 years to catch on to prenatals. People getting cleared of bodies don't need any such time lag. And so, may I make this simple request? Don't get spectacular until a few of the boys make it. You don't want to be lonesome, and you'll need reinforcements if a war gets declared on Thetans here. The pre-clear may think he can do it alone if he gets cleared of a body. He'll need more help and company than he thinks. So, again, as a final note on this chapter, let's not go upsetting governments and putting on a show to prove anything to Homo sapiens for a while. It's a horrible temptation to knock off hats at 50 yards and read books a couple of countries away and get into the Roediger Viewer section and the Hearst weeklies. But you'll just make it tough on somebody else who is trying to get across this bridge. Let sleeping sapiens snore in the bulk for yet a while. Then meet someplace and decide what to do about him and his two-penny wars, his insane, and his prisons. Tell people who want to invalidate all this, your criticism is very just. It's only fantasy. Cure up the lame and the halt and the incompetent with whatever display of technique you need. Protect theta clearing until there are a few. Chapter 7. History of the Theta Line. The history of the Theta Line is long and interesting. All you really want to know of it, however, is how much of it applies to your pre-clear. You will be pleased to discover that this is relatively little, a snap of the fingers in time compared to what could be. The whole track seems to be about 70 trillion years long. Thetans like facsimiles just like a Homo sapiens likes TV. A Thetan can take a facsimile and inspect it. He likes to collect them like a bibliophile collects books. Any Thetan has purloined packages of facsimiles from other Thetans, just like schoolboys take pictures of champions away from each other. Thus, your Thetan has two things. He has his own record of real experience, of things which actually happened to him, and he has whole banks of second facsimiles, or photographs he has taken from other Thetans' banks. Second facsimiles are complete pictures. They will show up with charge on an e-meter because they also contain the charge notation. But the moment you locate the fact that the whole bank of second facsimiles was taken from another being, the pre-clear stops using them as experience and they no longer show up on the e-meter. The characteristic of the second facsimile on the e-meter, then, is to show up for a short time and then, identified as from a borrowed bank, not register anymore. The best way to knock out second facsimile banks is to run out of the pre-clear incidents of borrowing facsimiles. He'll have many of these. A pre-clear needing a motivator for some overt act he has done will start to use a second facsimile as the motivator. It will even give him somatics. A pre-clear may have as many as 8 banks he is using. Identify 7 of them as borrowed banks, and you have him operating then on his own bank. This is the step necessary to get him running on his own actual track. Sometimes you may find that he has used a second facsimile so much that it has to be run. Run, it shows up as 2 or 3 still pictures, not as a moving picture. The only truly important facsimiles are those which actually happened to the Thetan himself, not what he borrowed. You can plot out, as you wish, the whole track. Incidents given here in this volume, or variations of them, will be found on this track. A common history of the Theta line as applied to your preclear starts with his separation from the main body of Theta, continues through home universe, runs into his entrapment by messed beings, and then through life as we know it, with its cycle of birth, messed body living, death, between lives wipeout, and birth again. The Thetan lives his life in segments called spirals. As he goes through the messed universe, he is involved in a series of spirals, each one less in terms of years ordinarily than the last. The first spiral, which occurred approximately 76 trillion years ago, might have been as long as 1 trillion years, but the next spiral after that was a little shorter. Succeeding spirals, each one shortened. The present spiral for most people is about 40,000 years long, although many are on a longer spiral than this and not a few are on a very short spiral. The length of this spiral might serve to indicate how much longer the Thetan can continue. By a spiral would be meant a more or less continuous cycle of action. A life in a messed body is a variety of cycles. It is not a spiral, for the preclear's knowingness often extends to earlier bodies. The first big cycle would be, at its probable longest, 76 trillion years. This would be subdivided into spirals, any one of which might comprise more than one lifetime. Spirals could be subdivided into lives, such as the current life, which is only one division of the current spiral. A whole spiral can get into restimulation in some earlier period, just as a past life can get into restimulation in this life. The incidents contained in that whole spiral, then, would be quite important. Sometimes a spiral has ended suddenly and earlier than scheduled for a preclear. This has remained to him as a very bad shock. It would be like a past death, but of a very great magnitude. The beginning of this spiral finds the being thinking he is new, with universes to conquer. And the end of the spiral finds him practically expiring, even as a Thetan. The overt acts of the Thetan are nipping, by which he harasses other Thetans, nipping messed beings, which usually kills them dead much to the Thetan's surprise, blanketing of messed bodies for sexual thrill and other purposes, trapping other Thetans after one has become a messed being, and the usual variety of overt acts common on Earth. None of this is very complicated as a history. It is made to look complicated by the existence of borrowed banks, entities, and cover-up actions by the preclear. The main task of the auditor is to get the preclear to identify himself as himself and to identify the actual track of himself. The rest is easy. Chapter 8. Types of Incidents on the Theta Line. The types of incidents found on the Theta Line are somewhat different than the auditor has been accustomed to running in present life processing. The elements contained in those incidents are the same: thought, emotion, effort, counter-thought, counter-emotion, counter-effort, attention units, and counter-units. The emphasis, however, is upon attention units and counter-units. The reason for this is rather obvious. How would you go about nearly killing an almost immortal being? It would require about the heaviest force possible. The tone scale above 2.0 contains perception. Below 2.0 there is little or no perception beyond attention units. Here is the occluded case. The individual himself may be running on a higher harmonic of his occluded tone, but the incidents which must be run to restore his perception in incidents are all too heavy to contain much in the way of perception. Hence, the tracking of attention units and the skills necessary to that are the requisites in running theta track incidents. Further, so heavy are these facsimiles that one must be very conversant with Technique 80, for the incidents hang up when the motivator is run too long or when the overt or dead is run too long. Old-time incidents were said to go into recession. This is because they had an overt or a motivator opposite from them which had to be run. The auditor never really understands apathy, fear, or anger until he has run the heavy facsimiles of the theta line. It is not that they affect the preclear more strongly. They do not. It is that they are so heavy They can be like so much glue or hardwood. Reversing to the opposite incident, to the overt from the motivator, to the motivator from the overt, alone makes it possible to run the theta line. One might have known for a very long time how far back this theta line went, and how serious were the incidents upon it. But it would have done him no good to know about these incidents, for without a tension unit running, which I developed only a short time ago, the incidents would not be runnable at all. There were two ways of running a case. One was to unburden it until the natural resurgence of the individual keyed out the lower, heavier incidents. The other was to run the incidents no matter how heavy they were. The theta line, then, could not be audited at all until a tension unit running and overt acts had been developed and refined for auditor application. The first method of unburdening is the one which auditors have been doing wholly, whether they realized it or not. The other one, of cleaning up the incidents themselves, the very bottom basics of the chains, has not been in use because it couldn't be. Thus, Dianetics was kept to one life until such time as the entire mechanical aspect of the lower track could be examined and techniques developed for resolving it. Of course, these techniques, if they resolve heavy incidents, resolve lighter ones as well. And so a revolution in processing can be announced, which, if you must process only the current life, will resolve it in most cases in 5 or 10 hours of processing. If it doesn't resolve, then the auditor simply doesn't know 80, and that's all there is to it. Despite the fact that they are heavy, that they are strange, theta line incidents are easy to audit if the auditor knows 80. If the incidents are very hard to run, then the auditor doesn't know 80. There is just one warning about theta line incidents. You are auditing the theta body, not the messed body. It is theoretically possible to run an incident out of the theta being which is too much for the messed body. A messed body which has a weak heart had better be audited in this lifetime only, until his heart condition entirely vanishes. Some of the theta line incidents kick back so hard against the messed body that the pre-clear is sure he will not live through them. If the auditor doesn't balance the overt against the motivator in 80, if he runs one side too strongly and heavily and really drives in the somatic, he may be embarrassed by making a theta clear before his time, the body still lying about but not breathing. The incidents themselves contain some things the auditor should know about. One doesn't have to be a nuclear physicist to understand these incidents, but the incidents are actually in the realm of nuclear physics. The auditor must only know the following. 1. Strong electrical currents produce in the vicinity of their flow what are called magnetic fields. If you wrap an electrical wire around a bar of iron and run current through the wire, you have a magnet. When you put a new piece of iron near this magnet, the field of the magnet snaps the piece of iron up against the magnet. 2. In the vicinity of any strong current, a wide force field exists. If this is intensified by using great quantities of current, the force field may extend for hundreds of feet or even miles. A radio station is a sort of force field in that it reaches hundreds or thousands of miles out from it. It takes a radio set to pick up or contact this field strongly enough to get a good reaction out of it. But actually, this instant, thousands of stations throughout the world are sending force fields through your body. They are too minute to be measured or detected without receiving sets, but they are force fields just the same. Wave impulses generated from a central point and extending far out from that point. If a station could generate 1 billion times the normal current a station uses, you would be able to contact that field physically. It would be so strong. 3. It is possible for a wave to act as a retractor. That is to say, it is possible for certain waves to pull back instead of push out. You turn a hose on somebody. This pushes him back. There can exist a wave which, if it were a hose, would pull you up to the nozzle instead of push you away. Thetans can put out such a retractor wave. 4. It is possible to rig up 2 or 3 or 1 standing pole, which is then activated with a current which will apply a very strong field to anyone in its vicinity. It is then possible to vary these fields to get various patterns of fields, or to shift from one field to another to get various angles of attack on an object. A thetan sitting amongst such a field pattern can be very thoroughly battered and rendered unconscious. It is also possible to rig up a post which would have a retractor wave coming out of it and which would pull a thetan into the post and pin him there. 5. A field is not always visible. Black band waves are the destructive waves. These are not visible, and they light up nothing. It may occur to the auditor that some of these incidents, as he hears them being run, are very reminiscent of the material which is commonly found among the insane in sanitariums. These people are quite given to chattering about fields and secret waves and telepathy and things being after them with electronic devices. The past ignorance consisted of treating anything an insane person had to say as non-factual data. Today, many even say that one is insane to give thought to any such circumstances as occur on the theta line. An experienced auditor knows that to make the insane sane, it is necessary to run the incidents the insane person is dramatizing. In a brilliant flash of insight, someday those in charge of sanitariums may see that the reason the insane chatter about electronics is that electronics are peculiarly adapted to tailor-making insanity, and that electronics have been used for unthinkably long times to handle and control beings. Electronics alone can make a truly slave society. Those in charge of sanitariums, in view of the fact that their own figures show that electrical shocks do no good and have no beneficial effects upon patients, may someday wonder why they themselves are so violently psychotic on the subject of insisting that the insane be given electronics. Ah, you have it. Those in charge are doing a crude and ineffective dramatization of theta line incidents. Electronics make slaves. If some of these electricity-obsessed but electrically ignorant chaps who so gently shepherd our insane really want results, I can show them not just how to make a patient tractable, I can show them how to give him total amnesia so that he can then be taught like a child and may become useful in a few months. You can really wipe people out with electronics. Electric shock is so stupid and so childish that one wonders. So heavy is the concentration on electronics in the theta line, so closely connected with energy behavior is the anatomy of a theta being, that only one trained in nuclear physics could have cracked this riddle. And with the data on this theta line, human treatment and the treatment of any life passes entirely into the hands of the electronics experts and out of the hands of the meddlers with minds whose training in electronics ends with knowing how to turn on an electric light, and who yet have, at this writing, the only legislative passports into the craniums of the ill. The era has just begun. Using theta line data accumulated from pre-clears about electronics, wavelengths, practices, and social customs, a handful of electronics experts could bring entire nations into their command with very little work, and those trained in yesterday would be completely powerless to stop or even detect that pervasion of command. This is regrettable, perhaps. Maybe all societies go this way. The atom bomb is a toy compared to a device which would turn into soulless slaves an entire city, an entire nation, an entire world. But instead of hiding this information, one should bring it to light. For if it goes underground, only then can it completely have its sway. One does not look for such an enslavement to occur, for you are reading the pages and the technologies which can and will defeat it. Thus, in running your pre-clear, keep in mind that he has been, in the past, part of societies which had electronics down to a very fine point, which could control the very breathing of their subjects. Recall that he may have been part of a town, for instance, in which any revolutionary, lazy, or non-survival thought, if thought, would bring him without will to the steps of the local thought police station. Remember in processing your pre-clear that for thousands of years he has played the game of enslaving and being enslaved. And the depths of control were such, the acts in that control were such, as to outsoar any mere imaginings from modern literature. Modern science fiction, even that, is a weak piker compared to the data of the past from which these writers of the future took their plots. A public couldn't stomach what really went on before Earth. Your pre-clear isn't able to stomach it. That's why he's forgotten it. What does it take to aberrate a thetan? Thousands and thousands of volts, thousands of amperes, poured into destructive wavelengths and thrown straight in his face. What does it take to get him into a position where he can be aberrated? Trickery, treachery, lies. Running electronics incidents is not difficult, not if you know 80. But there is a datum which must be repeated here, even though it belongs in How to Audit. The definition in Dianetics of invalidation. Invalidation is any thought, emotion, or effort, counter-thought, counter-emotion, or counter-effort, which denies or smothers the thought, emotion, or effort of the individual. By this definition, a man is invalidated by being struck by anything. If he is run into by a car, he is invalidated. Any accident invalidates him. Any force which he cannot conquer or oppose invalidates him. Turn to the chart in your Handbook for Pre-Clears. Here you see on the chart of attitudes, I know, I am, faith, etc. The more the force of an individual is cancelled out by counterforces, the lower he drifts on this chart. Hit by strong forces, he conceives that he isn't. Faith at the top of the chart turns to disbelief at the bottom. Turn a pre-clear loose into a heavy theta line incident, and what reaction do you get? You get bottom chart reactions. That is to say, the force is such in the incident that he is utterly unable to combat it. Thus he conceives himself utterly invalidated. In such a wise, he comes to express in the incident bottom scale attitudes. He can't believe it, he isn't there, etc., etc. Run any theta line incident with its heavy impacts, and your pre-clear will immediately start to discredit it. Keep him at it. Wave aside all his lacks of belief and other comments, and soon the tone band will rise a notch or two. Keep the tone rising, using overts and motivators, and you eventually get perception and concepts. Why do you think these theta line incidents got lost? Why can't a man who has undergone a between-lives battering recall that he lived before? Invalidation by force is the answer. The chart of attitudes will give you your guide. There is another thing you should know about these incidents and the emotional state of the pre-clear. He has become, in his own eyes, so degraded by force invalidation that he has devoted himself to this vegetable thing, the messed body, as the last-ditch effort to control some part of the environment. He is invalidated to nothing, so the body has to be something. And there is something else, a scale you should have, of invalidation. Criticism and counter-criticism are the overt and motivator invalidations on the thought level. Misemotionalism and counter-misemotionalism are the overt and motivator invalidations on the emotion level. Physical force and counter-physical force are the overt and motivator invalidations on the effort level. In current or recent lives, thought, emotion, and effort hang up on the early theta line incidents. If you can't get a theta line incident of the electronics type to unburden, run criticism and counter-criticism in the current life. In general, you will find the pre-clear has been subjected, as a theta being, to enormous invalidation of all his force, power, and natural attributes. The rise in tone potential in running the theta line is such that you can expect the pre-clear to go from low to high on the E meter after only 1 or 2 heavy electronics incidents have been run. But make sure they are theta line and that they happened to the thetan who is the pre-clear before you. The intent of other beings was to make this pre-clear into a willing or unwilling but at least obedient slave, or to get him out of the area and keep him running away thereafter, or to nail him into complete useless immobility. They wanted him to have good reaction to police threats, and most psychotics go psychotic immediately after a police interview, no matter how innocent it was. They wanted him to leave messed bodies alone and respect them. On his part, your pre-clear was part and parcel of many societies, took his role in efforts to conquer thetans after he had been conquered. He wanted messed bodies to be respected now that he had one. He wanted his slaves to be obedient. He wanted beings he didn't like to start running and keep on running, or barring that, to be immobile messed thereafter. Your pre-clear has been guilting himself of any crime or action he protests occurred to him. For by his worry, he confesses that whether or not it happened to him, he did it to others. Your pre-clear was basically good, happy, ethical, and aesthetic before the contagion of the messed universe got him. Then, still a thetan, he wasn't very good, but he was still trusting and ethical. Finally, when he had a body, well, look around. Chapter 9. Specific incidents on the theta line. The specific incidents you must run on the theta line are directed solely at this stage toward attaining a voluntary and controlled separation between the messed body and the theta body. This is much easier to do than you would at first believe, and the incidents necessary to accomplishing it are relatively easy to comprehend and locate. Remember that to create a theta clear, it is only necessary to bring the being up to a point where it can leave and return upon a messed body. A cleared theta clear would be a fully cleared thetan, something so much higher on the tone scale than a messed clear or theta clear that it is difficult to comprehend. A theta clear, however, is not difficult to attain. Neither does it guarantee the release of all possible aberrations. A theta clear, some tones higher than anything known before, is yet subject to some aberration, and will be until he attains the state of a cleared theta clear. Thus, don't invalidate somebody as a theta clear just because he doesn't act like a saint. He might even be more devilish than ever. Separation from the body. How the mystics have striven for this one. India and Join Nirvana have given us techniques which are guaranteed to glue a thetan to a body as though riveted and tied with iron bands. So beware of mysticism and its techniques, yogism and its nonsense. Your hard-working author has been over the jumps and through the hoops of more mysticism than is even suspected, and on the ground where mysticism first hit Earth, India. And I can guarantee you that these practices and hopes are a sort of theta trap to keep men in their bodies, in apathy, ill, and tied to superstition. Theta clearing is about as practical and simple as repairing a shoelace. It has nothing to do with hypnotism, voodooism, charlatanism, monkeyism, or theosophy. Done, the thetan can do anything a stage magician can do in the way of moving objects around. But this isn't attained by holding one's breath, or thinking right thoughts, or voting Republican, or any other superstitious or mystic practice. So, which is the reason I've brought it up, rule out, auditor, any mumbo-jumbo of mysticism or spiritualism. Rule out anything but good, solid, contactable incidents which are run wholly and entirely with the mechanical techniques of Dianetics with particular attention to 80. The key chart of theta clearing is the chart of attitudes which you will find in the Handbook for Pre-Clears. All the straight wire is done from that chart. Here are some incidents, more or less in the order that the auditor will find them and run them. The Jack-in-the-Box. Here we have an invader trick, a method of trapping thetans. It is a facsimile scrambler. It is very early, not the earliest, only the earliest invader trick. The thetan area is invaded by messed beings. The thetans bother the messed beings, nipping them, etc. The messed beings use theta traps. One of these is to give to thetans pretty little boxes. These boxes contain a stack of pictures. As thetans are disposed to gather facsimiles, these pictures are very acceptable. The thetan looks over the pictures. He finds they are quite similar one to another. They show each one a picture of a box of pictures. When he replaces the lid, the box explodes violently. He instinctively tries to dampen the explosion. He gets his aura of beingness full of pictures which are extremely confusing, being pictures of boxes of pictures. The running of this incident is simple. One keeps the pre-clear's attention on the point of explosion, out from him. Of course, this point slams back at him every time he puts his attention on it. You will find a pre-clear with this intrastimulation to be very curious about cereal boxes, which have pictures of boxes of cereal, which have pictures of boxes of cereal. There may be several such incidents, including being near such explosions. The obsession. This incident is the incident which gives one the feeling he has to have facsimiles in order to know. Actually, one doesn't need facsimiles. One thinks in concepts, approximations, pervasions. A fine control trick is to make one think he has to have facsimiles. This aberrates him and makes him easy to handle. Educational systems are locks on this. The incident is an electronic incident, very strong, and sometimes includes a great many source points of energy directed against one's back. Just before it, one knows. The force of the waves themselves, depressing one on the chart of attitudes, stops one from knowing. This incident gives one an obsession to have facsimiles, to steal facsimiles, to do anything to get facsimiles. One is actually trying to find what one lost in the incident, and that was lost by force alone. Warning: don't ever try to run words or other perceptions out of any electronic incidents. Words are seldom included in them. Communication in such an era was usually by thought transfer, not by words. This is very important. Borrowing. Thetans hold facsimiles very loosely. A high-scale thetan can pick up and discard facsimiles at will. Further, a thetan often steals the facsimile chains of another thetan as a result of the obsession. Thus we will find as the primary source of occlusion the borrower. A thetan puts a retractor beam on another thetan and starts to drag out his facsimiles. The victim feels like he is going to pieces. He, the victim, puts up a black screen to halt the outflow of his facsimiles. The borrower counters by throwing a cone of force above and below the victim, pinning him between these two cones as though to squeeze him out. The black protecting screen usually can be held in place, but the facsimiles, like smoke, trickle out around the black screen and to the borrower. The most remarkable thing about this incident is the slowness with which facsimiles seem to run out. Each facsimile has its own time tab. No matter how rapidly they are leaving, these time tabs give the illusion of a very long time. Running up and down one's time track often gives this illusion. Thus, although the outflow from the victim may be done in seconds, it may seem to take years. The pre-clear often protests against running this incident because it takes too long. Actually, it takes very little time. Naturally, on the borrower, the overt act must be gotten as well as the motivator, as in all incidents run. If you don't get the reverse to what you are running, incidents hang up. In the borrower, the overt is the same as the motivator, as the incidents are very similar, but with reverse action. Run the pre-clear as the borrower and the victim both, one after the other, back and forth, in order to get up the whole of each. This incident is the source of fear of losing one's facsimiles, the source of occlusion, and the collapse of time tracks. Nipping. Nipping is a practice much beloved by thetans. They send out two energy streams like hands and slap both sides of a victim's head. This mildly shocks a thetan to which it is done. It can kill a messed body. This slap is notable for causing ringing in the ears. This predates any invader. It is very early. It also postdates invaders. In running nips, one is running something very important, for it is a basic on holding on to a messed body. As in all incidents, when you run the motivator, run the overt afterwards, or vice versa. Blanketing. This incident consists of throwing oneself as a thetan over another thetan or over a messed body. Blanketing is done to obtain an emotional impact, or even to kill. It is strongest in sexual incidents, where the thetan throws two messed bodies together in the sexual act in order to experience their emotions. This sexual lust comes from the haver. It is very, very strong and is very restimulative in the running. Here is where the second dynamic becomes aberrated. There is considerable frenzy in these incidents. This is also basic on fastening on to a messed body, or holding a messed body, or protecting messed bodies. It is an overt act. It has deads later than it in almost any sexual activity on the part of the pre-clear. At times, a thetan will blanket a messed body and hold it so that it can be attacked by another messed body motivated by another thetan. Later, the thetan, having committed this overt act, will start protecting messed bodies from attacks by thetans. This gives a person great antipathy towards seeing men and women together, lays in a basic on jealousy, etc. There is a steep emotional curve in blanketing. First, there is the high excitement, then orgasm, then, for the bodies, contentment or apathy, as the case may be. This drop affects the thetan strongly, and he gets fastened to the bodies, and it takes some while to separate himself at times. These incidents make the future fixation on messed bodies possible. Thus, Freud had something when he blamed sex, but sex is far from the whole story. The basic error a thetan made was in considering a messed body something very special, unmotivated by thetans. He did not realize that any messed human body is run by a decayed thetan. In thirsting to run messed bodies and in contacting them, he thought he was contacting a cellular body, whereas he was actually contacting a thetan and a body. He desired to go into ARC without knowing it with a decadent thetan who had a messed body. That every messed, human-like body had a decayed thetan on it was unknown to thetans until now. This accounts for the enormous kickback received by a thetan when he nips a messed body or blankets one. The body never did have that power. The decayed thetan did. Respect of messed bodies, then, was entirely misplaced. This is the primary error thetans made. The haver. Don't think thetans were only abused. When messed bodies tried to invade and take over an area, they usually wound up enslaved to the thetans in that area. And the thetans used them horribly. The invader sometimes came in with electronics, his only defense against a thetan. The thetan quite ordinarily took the electronics over and used them on the messed bodies. One of the processes thetans used on messed bodies was a half-light, half-black gun which shot out a wave. Half of this wave, usually the black, hit the right side of the victim's body. The other half, in the same explosion, usually the light side, hit the left side of the victim. This had the effect of causing him to be two people. It is also the basic on half paralysis, such as strokes. There was not always regularity in this incident. Sometimes it was the practice to shoot the victim one way and then turn him around and shoot him the other, sometimes the sides and head as well. The haver was rigged up with religious symbols, and it truly lays in religion. There is a devil on one side, a symbol carried in the light, angels on the other side. Sometimes it was very fancy and was complicated with dolls in the shape of nudes, angels, devils, strung on wires to slide and dance. It did terrible things to the victim. It gave him a conflict, one side with the other, one being good, the other being bad. It gave him sexual compulsion, all mixed up with religious compulsion, so that an overdose of indulgence would send him to church, sometimes into a life of crime. It was a control factor used to keep the community fighting itself. The haver lies as a basic under sexual malpractice, under religious fervor. It shows up in almost every preclear as being in chronic restimulation. It is the one the auditor runs as an overt act when the preclear has a sexual or religious motivator. Remember that the restimulation of a motivator when one does an overt act is not natural, but a consequence of having a body and implants about bodies. You will find some of this, you do wrong, you'll get it right back, in the haver and similar incidents. Facsimile 1. This incident is in everyone's bank, either as a second facsimile or as an original. Only in the latter case should it be run. It is called Facsimile 1 because it is the first proven-up whole-track incident which, when audited out of a long series of people, was found to eradicate such things as asthma, sinus trouble, chronic chills, and a host of other ills. It has a verbal content in most cases. It is quite varied when found as an original, for in this case it happened to the preclear in the last 10 or 20,000 years. It was originally laid down in this galaxy about 1 million years ago. The coffee grinder, which might be an alternate name for it, is leveled at the preclear and a push-pull wave is played over him, first on his left side, then on his right, and back and forth from side to side, laying in a bone-deep somatic which cannot be run unless you recognize it as a vibration, not the solid board it seems to be. When this treatment is done, the preclear is dumped in scalding water, then immediately in ice water. Then the preclear is put in a chair and whirled around. He was quite swollen after the pummeling of the waves and was generally kept in a badly run but quite modern hospital for a few days. Sometimes he was given several treatments, and after the first one, would report back on schedule for the next. Fac 1 was an outright control mechanism invented to cut down rebel raids on invader installations. It was probably designed by the fourth invader and used by him in its original state and ritual for a considerable time. It gave him a nice, non-combative, religiously insane community. The most important part of Fac 1 appertains to its summons to court. This was a sick quiver installed in the stomach area by the coffee grinder during the first part of the incident. The coffee grinder laid in baps on the pineal and other points, but almost knocked out the pineal potential forever and relegated its actions to the pituitary. It knocked in every other glandular point, and these same baps were used against the vagus nerve to give what everyone knows as an anxiety stomach, uncontrolled bowel action, etc., etc. The invader wanted people to report when sent for. Thus, the context, which must never be run until the emotion and effort are reduced, when the vagus area was bapped, concentrates on getting the pre-clear to report quickly when summoned, and makes him terrified of arrest, of courts, of other legal hocus-pocus. Thus, criminal action against individuals, or sometimes any legal action, interrupts the glandular system, gives an anxiety reaction which has no equal anywhere else on the track. Experienced police know this sudden, hitherto inexplicable collapse of the criminal and his feeling that he would rather be dead than simply arrested. One cannot exaggerate the effect of FAC 1 in the legal department. A check on psychotics recently showed 5, taken at random, to have been triggered by a threat of arrest a short time before the psychotic break occurred. This is FAC 1 at work. The coffee grinder is a 2-handled portable machine which, when turned, emits a heavy push-pull electronic wave in a series of stuttering baps. It is violently restimulated by what construction companies call widowmakers, pneumatic drills of the kind used to tear up pavement. The sound is not dissimilar. FAC 1, not silicosis, is responsible for the mortality of workers assigned to these drills on construction projects. In the original version, the invaders operated these machines while wearing hoods and goggles not unlike hot papa suits used today on aircraft carriers. The victim was placed behind a black gauze curtain, but in running FAC 1, the pre-clear usually catches glimpses of the coffee grinder and the users. Some people who wear horn-rimmed glasses are found to be solidly in the operator valence in FAC 1. Such people are lean and hectic. Some persons whose faces are swollen and who have a dumpy build, who are given to asthma, are found solidly in the victim valence. The invader gratuitously left these machines around for the yokels. Believing that the treatment was vital to get to heaven or some such thing, the yokels practiced on each other, found new victims, and generally spread the implant around. Trouble with the machines the invader left around was that they backfired while they were working, sending out a ray into the chest of the operator to restimulate him, the yokel operator not suspecting that the machine was hitting anything else but his victim. And the yokel operator had neither goggles nor a hot papa suit. One of these unskilled operators lasted sometimes as long as 40 victims before he collapsed from restimulation himself. The backfire characteristic of the machines left around also inhibited the local people from using electronic handguns and rifles, thus killing off guerrillas who sought to attack the invader, for electronic weapons had a flashback against the user. FAC 1 deteriorated down the years, became quite varied, and with the colonization of Earth about 35,000 years ago, or up to 70,000 in a very few cases, when used, FAC 1 was quite non-standard. But it has been used on Earth against some pre-clears. About 100 and some thousand years ago, the Haver was substituted for FAC 1 as much more efficient, much quicker, and less destructive of personnel and more creative of slave-like devotion. Thus, the pre-clear is certain to have the Haver as an original. You will also get an e-meter drop on FAC 1. Be sure to ask if it is original or a borrowed facsimile. And don't forget its overt act is FAC 1 being given by the pre-clear to a victim. Before Earth. There is a before Earth and a before messed universe in all banks. The incidents are not dissimilar. They consist of the pre-clear being summoned before a council, being frowned down, being sent elsewhere than where he was. The odd part of these incidents to the pre-clear is that he is usually not guilty of anything, not aware of having offended. He is simply recruited, is brought in, is sentenced to be transported, and goes to a new area. The only thing remarkable about these before incidents is that they are a very definite degradation and condemnation of the pre-clear. They are best run by scanning the pre-clear backwards on each column of the chart of attitudes from, for instance, I know not to I know, etc., for the council's intent is to reduce the person downscale in order to get a more obedient colonist. The joiner. There are 3 major joiners on the track. Most of them found will be second facsimiles and do not need to be run. Here is the basic on entities. A person is packed in with other souls by electronics. Actually, these entities are synthetic. Very early on the track, 2 more entities were added to the victim. They were, the 3, placed in a ring and hammered by electronics to get them to fuse. There is an empty spot in the center. A later joiner adds 2 more souls. These incidents are responsible for the pre-clear being softened up to a point where he can be influenced by having a hypnotized soul thrown at him. You will find the marks of these souls on every pre-clear. They are the basics on demon circuits. An entity favors the environment, not the pre-clear, and treats the pre-clear just like somebody in the environment treated the pre-clear. If you ask the entities questions, the areas having demon circuits in them will respond. If you ask the entities why they are there, they will tell you that they were the crew of the Thetan, who is asleep, that they will not work, that they were all bundled together and sent here. The Thetan response is that he made 12 errors, eventually could not control his crew, went into ARC with them, became like an entity, was bundled up, Thetan, crew and all, and shipped down here to work matters out. The entities seem to be most interested in keeping data away from the Thetan, convincing him he has done wrong. Each entity claims to have had a function that was very specialized. Insane people are found to be running on their entities, not their Thetans. This is a very bad condition, betokening very solid valence walls. Every entity can be audited independently of the others. Past deaths can be run out of them with the relief of many somatics. Each has a body, so they say, in pawn elsewhere. Here is a wealth of data and detail. Fortunately, none of it is very important to us at this time, except in understanding the behavior of Homo sapiens. For these entities, regardless of auditing, work overtime on the pre-clear. However, in auditing the theta line, one is interested only in auditing the Thetan, and this is very easy to do with the incidents given above and below. One ignores the entities. They may be simply borrowed banks. They do not interfere with auditing, for their incidents all run like second facsimiles. And although they register at first on an e-meter, they drop out the moment the auditor asks if the incident comes from a borrowed bank. If we had to audit through the complexity and aberration of the entities, we would not have a very easy time of it. Fortunately, it is not generally necessary to even think or know about entities in order to audit the Thetan. The joiners, so far as I can establish at this time, can be ignored. If an entity pops up and won't be ignored, just make your pre-clear move into him and audit out where the entity is stuck on the track, psychotic, and the trouble stops. Considerable time was spent on entities in these investigations. There was a great deal of data about them yet to learn when they were bypassed in the discovery of direct methods of auditing the Thetan, who, after all, is the pre-clear. A case of paralysis, however, was partially remedied by bringing the entity who governed that side up to present time and putting the Thetan in charge of the area again. Experiment with them for your own information if you like. You'll find entities lie, cheat, hold out data, and act generally neurotic or psychotic. Here is your circuit case. As the Thetan loses control over his environment and his body, these entities move in on areas. Rehabilitate the Thetan and the entity problem vanishes. Start auditing entities and they increase in power. These questions are at this time not answered satisfactorily. Are entities sub-beings, or are they simply electronic installations? Are they very decadent Thetans who have been blanketed by the pre-clear? Have they simply decayed until they followed the GE line? Are they control factors from between lives? This question has been answered. Is it necessary to audit entities? And the answer to that is no. The ice cube. Here is an intriguing incident which, if your pre-clear demands, should be audited. This is evidently a method of transportation of beings to a new area. The being is packed in ice, is taken to the new area, and is usually dumped in the ocean. Your pre-clear, if he has this one in restimulation, has very cold hands and feet chronically. A Thetan responds to hypnosis, pain, force, and other factors. He also responds to being frozen in ice. You may wonder how the being, if the ice cube is used or is necessary at all, can then get into the between lives area so easily. In other words, if he can be transported between lives with ease, why should he be dumped originally in the form of an ice pack? Possibly the answer lies in two invader crews at work. An old invader already in command of an area but rather downscale, controls by between lives. A new invader crew with more ambition plants beings in the same area. These beings then fall into the between lives routine, which exists unbeknownst to the new crew. The new crew in the area is later quite surprised to find that their planted beings, so carefully dumped in the sea from a saucer, are being picked up between lives and given treatment by an old established invader whose methods of political control are long since established. When such a discovery is made, the new crew may very likely knock out some of the old crew installations and upset the routine. The ice cube is quite authentic. Between lives. At death, the theta being leaves the body and goes to the between lives area. Here he reports in, is given a strong forgetter implant, and is then shot down to a body just before it is born. At least that is the way the old invader in the Earth area was operating. The implant is very interesting. The pre-clear is seated before a wheel which contains numbers of pictures. As the wheel turns, these pictures go away from him. He is moved aside to the right, the left, the back. A mirror arrangement shows him still sitting there before the pictures. A force screen hits him through the pictures. The pictures dim out. The whole effect is to give him the impression that he has no past life, that he is no longer the same identity, that his memory has been erased. The force screen flattens his own vitality, thus invalidating his existence, thus installing by force alone a forgetter. The pictures, by the way, are simply generalized views, stills of vacant lots, houses, backyards, of a recent Earth period, and they could apply to anybody. They are not the facsimiles of the pre-clear. The incident contains such force that the pre-clear, at first quite closely in contact, runs it willingly. As the force cuts down his past identity, he begins to disbelieve the incident, then himself. If left in restimulation, he has a difficult time remembering things for some days. Gradually, through a lifetime, this between lives incident keys in. At first it engulfs childhood, then later in later years. Finally, with age, the pre-clear starts to cycle through it automatically and goes into a second childhood, which is to say he anticipates the coming implant, conceives it to have been done if he lives beyond a normal lifespan for him. If it usually happened that he died at 60, should he now live to 70, he will get a feeling in the last 10 years that it has been done to him, a routine time restimulation effect. Pre-clears do not always report. To have been implanted once is to get a restimulation on dying, which will wipe out the past life. Some pre-clears have 1, some have 5, some more of these implants. The life-to-life forgetter would follow as a natural course of events from the fact that the pre-clear identifies himself and is identified by others as a messed body. Further, he identifies everyone else as a messed body. Also, he would rather start, if he must be a messed body, with a clean slate and a new body. Also, he has many overt acts of convincing others they should forget their entire pasts, for by that he can train them for a better future for him. No implant would ever succeed unless there was a natural cause and reason for the implant to magnify. The report area for most has been Mars. Some women report to stations elsewhere in the solar system. There are occasional incidents about Earth report stations. The report stations are protected by screens. The last Martian report station on Earth was established in the Pyrenees. Entities have between lives incidents independent of the Thetan. These are not necessary to run. There are many types of between lives earlier on the track, about 10 different periods of the entire track being devoted to a practice of keeping a Thetan in a body, working, and in an area. These show up as second facsimiles and are not necessary to run. But the data is there in the secondary banks, and it is very wonderful data on how to keep races enslaved. The emanator. Now and then your pre-clear is found stuck in the emanator. This is a large, glowing body of radioactive material which hangs magically in thin air, a sort of a god, an all-knower. Its outpulse puts one into a trance. The story usually starts with the pre-clear volunteering to come to Earth and do good. He walks into the presence of the emanator, and that is that. He has volunteered, perhaps simply out of curiosity, wondering what is contained in that big building. His agreement is, of course, enforced. He is told that they will keep his body safe for him. He agrees to go help out and is transported by hypnotic transference. It never occurs to the pre-clear to question the safety of his body. He reports back to it between lives. The body is preserved and can stay that way for some thousands of years. But bodies do not last forever. One day the pre-clear dies on Earth and reports back dutifully to find no body. After that, he conceives himself to be lost. He is given no new goals between lives. He is ignored. The next life may find him knocking on the door of a psychiatrist, for he is very lost and homeless and generally bewildered. Running the emanator sequence and loss makes all right again. The emanator trick as a recruiting device is very old. You will find many second facsimiles about it in the pre-clear's bank. The double body. With one body in a trance in one place and another body here on Earth, trouble occasionally occurs. A pre-clear during an operation may switch bodies. Pain and anesthetic or a serious accident causes him to change to the other area with a shocking impact on the other body. The other body quite commonly dies or is deranged by this sudden impact. The pre-clear wakes up from unconsciousness on Earth and tells or represses the fact that he has died. Obviously, as the surgeon or doctor will attest, he didn't die, for the heart of the patient kept beating. Actually, the patient flicked into the other body, transferred the shock and pain, and killed it, then came back here and awakened. This incident leaves a patient very, very badly disturbed. The surge into the between lives area is so obviously not a death that attendants there, if attracted, will knock the body there out with commands to forget, to not let anyone know in order to protect the mystery. Everyone, particularly mental doctors, has in the past accounted for this circumstance of the patient thinking he died, with wild theories about the effects of anesthetics and delusion. But no patient so treated ever recovered by being informed that it is all anesthetic nightmare and delusion. And they do recover immediately if the incident is run out. Nitrous oxide is very vicious in this regard, for it does not dull any pain. It simply drowns the patient. Patients wake up after such a double-body incident with the feeling that they have just learned the secret of the universe, but they can't quite recall it. They have, to some extent. They've learned they're kept and implanted elsewhere. It is important for an auditor to know that a double body may have happened some lifetimes ago during an accident. To a pre-clear who doesn't know of the past life, much less the double body, the result is quite alarming. To run a double body, run the operation or accident on Earth, then run the incident as from the other body in pawn. Then run going under on Earth and waking in the other body and then waking on Earth. Then run being in the other place and appearing on Earth. Run the double body until it is very thoroughly reduced, running the overt acts on it as well, which will be what the pre-clear says they are. Theta traps. There is no subject more interesting than that of theta traps. It is of vast interest to any invader. It is of vaster interest to your pre-clear. How can you trap a thetan? By curiosity, by giving him awards and prizes of an implant, by retractor screens, by mock-ups, by ornate buildings which he will enter unsuspectingly, only to be electronicked down. By many such means the thetan is reduced from knowing to a colonist, a slave, a messed body. All theta traps have one thing in common. They use electronic force to knock the thetan into forgetting, into unknowingness, into effect. Their purpose is to rid the area of those nuisances, the thetans who cannot be policed, and to gain personnel, always the former, not always the latter. The thetan feels himself, in some traps, being drawn up to a post. He fights it with his force. It cannot be successfully fought. He succumbs. A day or 100 years later, he is picked off and elsewise used. A thetan can sustain many implants of this character without becoming obsessed about having a body, but he becomes obsessed very easily about having facsimiles. The jack-in-the-box is a variety of theta trap. After he was caught in some kind of theta trap, the thetan was handled as follows. The bodybuilder. Sometimes a thetan is taken off a theta trap and put into a field which makes him fight again with his attention units. The purpose of this field is to make him resist its force and to resist it so as to mold him. Out of his attention units, he builds a body. Later, he is given sharp shots through the places where joints are supposed to be and is generally tailored into a body. There were many of these on the whole track. In your pre-clear, they are probably second facsimiles. The bodybuilder used some 50 million years ago was very precise, although it has degenerated and is less formalized, and although it is doubtful if you will find it in more than a second facsimile, the original version is given here. The jiggler. Placed over a post, the thetan was moved up and down rapidly and eccentrically for some time. He would try to hold on to and stop the post, would go into apathy and finish by being entirely invalidated as himself, and would think of himself as the post, that having become cause. The whirler. The thetan was placed on a platform which whirled eccentrically, jerkily to the left and right until he would turn as the post turned. The bouncer. The thetan was bounced up and down eccentrically until he had a facsimile which fixed him, it would appear, on his time track. The spinner. A chair device was used to spin the thetan until he had no orientation. This is the probable source of the slang term spinning, meaning going insane. The rocker. This swung or teetered the thetan to the left and right slowly and quietly. This incident is dramatized today by mystics who, not being quite low enough on the scale to die, finish the job by picking up old electronic implant motions and practice them until they have control of the body, which they mean to mean, without meaning to mean it, complete body control of I. The boxer. This incident is a cousin to the fly trap. Its purpose was to make the thetan into a complete stimulus response mechanism. He was hit from every angle by a device not unlike a boxing glove. He would be forced to kick back against it with his force. At length, he would be psychotic enough to return every motion he received. This is actually aberration itself. It is the psychologist's definition, though vaguely put, of a well-adjusted human being, one who stimulates and responds without thought. The faller. This installs a fear of falling, also fixes the thetan in the incident on the track. He is dropped again and again and again to different drops and at varied intervals until he is jammed. The education. After all these, the thetan was given a complete education. This was of a hypnotic stimulus response variety. It was the type of education which makes a file card system out of a thinking being. It is dramatized today in universities as it requires no skilled instruction. The fly trap. Very, very early on the track, a long time before any of the present populace came into being, there was a theta trap called the fly trap. It was of a gummy material. The thetan who got into it punched and fought at this material until he was psychotic enough to react to the physical universe laws of responding to motions. He was taken out of this trap by a crew of do-gooders who had caught him for his own good, and who trained him in religious sweetness and syrup until they considered him fit to be part of their group. The attitude of these people was so good, their manners so understanding, that the thetan usually ran away as soon as possible. Sunday school sometimes brings this, even as a second facsimile, which it nearly always is, into heavy restimulation. Remember, auditor, that a second facsimile doesn't have to be audited, but will blow when the pre-clear sees that he borrowed it from somebody. But that doesn't mean he won't use it. Lacking a motivator, your pre-clear, guilty of some overt act, will go back into his borrowings and pick out any second facsimile which looks vicious enough to justify his own action. And he will use it to the hilt. Thus you may find your pre-clear stuck in incidents of great age and fury. You may find him with Arschlycus in full bloom, where they spent 10,000 lives laboring on the same job, were stuffed like snakes every few weeks to feed them, where they returned after death because a piece of their own body was held in pawn, and unable to work and given to a weariness beyond description. Located as a second facsimile, the entire incident tends to depart. Or, locating the overt act the pre-clear actually did himself, the second facsimile goes without auditing. If a pre-clear holds hard to a second facsimile, he is guilty of more overt acts than he is telling the auditor, or the incident is something else than it appears to be. Ask your e-meter. Chapter 10. Generalized Incidents. Generalized incidents would include anything the preclear has done which is an opposite motion to the incident in which he is hung up. The opposite motion is what hangs the incident up. Motivator. A motivator is an incident which happens to the preclear and which he dramatizes. Overt act. An overt act, which may also be covert or accidental, is an incident which the preclear does to another dynamic. Dead. A dead, D-E-D, is an incident the preclear does to another dynamic and for which he has no motivator, i.e., he punishes or hurts or wrecks something, the like of which has never hurt him. Now he must justify the incident. He will use things which didn't happen to him. He claims that the object of his injury really deserved it, hence the word, which is a sarcasm. Dead X. A dead X is an incident which happens to a preclear after he has a dead. It is always on the same chain or subject, is always after the dead. It means the dead exposed. It is covered guilt. Its effect on the preclear is all out of proportion to the actual injury to him. One would think he was murdered by the harsh word or the scratch. He will explain violently how terribly he has been used. Whenever you have a preclear who has been too abused for words and keeps on giving you incidents which tend to fix the guilt on the family or women or some such thing, the auditor can recognize in these dead X's and know that he must look for the dead. The preclear is usually quite unwilling to give up the dead, but the e-meter will find it. It is on the same subject as the dead X's. If he has many incidents about things his mother did to him, and these seem fairly routine, there is a previous incident about his mother or some earlier life mother, where, with an unmotivated cruelty, he executed a dead. Misassist. A misassist is an incident wherein the preclear has tried to help on some dynamic and failed. These are very aberrative. The incident may be short and harsh, or it may be a large number of small incidents. The misassist is a failure to assist either by omission or commission. It is always preceded by a motivator overt situation lockup or a dead X situation. The preclear, having injured some dynamic, has come into the state of protecting that dynamic out of all proportion to the other dynamics. Perhaps he has many times succeeded in his protection, and such incidents are not aberrative. But one day he tries to assist and fails, or he should have assisted and didn't, and the result is the straw added to the weight of an earlier facsimile hang-up. Degrader. A degrader is an incident or chain of incidents whereby a low-toned person seeks to bring down the tone of a higher-toned person. The actual intent of the low-toned person is to get another low enough so that the latter can be helped. The low-toned person believes he cannot be of assistance to anything higher on the scale than himself. Therefore, he will attempt to reduce the tone of another, and then, when he has him well down by degrading him, he will be able to assist, becomes sympathetic, and conducts himself properly, until, of course, the person is up again. The preclear will, if very low-toned, try this on the auditor. Any low-toned person will do it. The preclear may have many degraders he has done, or he may have had many degraders happen to him. If the preclear is prone to degraders, he has a dead X situation on the same dynamic he permits to degrade him. If he accepts criticism from women, he has a dead X on women. If he claims it was father who got him down, who invalidated him, he has a dead X on his own father, or some past father, or man who looks like his father. If you find a degrader situation, look for the dead X on the same subject. If the preclear is given to invalidating, he has a degrader chain he has done. The dynamic he degrades has a prior dead X. Chapter 11. The Transfer. The transfer is the single most important phase of Technique 88. It is a circumstance rather than an incident. It is a specific action of the thetan with regard to a messed body. It is the swing of the thetan from out of the body where he belongs into the body where he is thereafter in trouble. The transfer is the action of going into the messed body. Except in deaths or severe accidents or operations, you won't find a transfer out. Your task in auditing is to find and run all the transfers into bodies, in order to achieve a self-determined, fully alive transfer out. Where is the Thetan? Contrary to any past practice, his second best place is just outside the mest body, monitoring it with direct contact on the mest body's motor controls on either side of the head. His very best place, of course, is out of contact with the mest body entirely and fully alive as I. His worst place is inside the mest body. The Thetan in most cases is behind and above the mest body. In many cases he shifts position rather often, even in one incident. Now and then he is found to run the body from in front of it. This causes a direction reversal on the part of the person so that he doesn't know right from left. People can teach him continually, but he will still say his right is his left and his left is his right. And so it is. For I in this person is the Thetan, and the Thetan is in front, facing the mest body, and right is the Thetan's right, of course. There are cases where the Thetan is barely or hardly ever in contact with the body. These cases can be considered quite aberrated, the Thetan seeing the body from across rooms or streets, convinced that he is the body, but unable to do anything about it. There are cases where the Thetan is inside the body continually, but this is to say that he isn't a Thetan at all, but degenerated into an entity, and we find this in those low-tone, wide-open cases, full-on but raving psychotics, or nearly so. A Thetan is pretty bad off if he thinks all he can do is run a mest body. This alone is a half-transfer. He hasn't gone into the body yet, forever thereafter perhaps to be an entity, but he has achieved the level of degradation where he thinks the mest body is more important than he is, and that he is the mest body. He has become propitiative toward the body to a point where he is a servant, where it becomes him in his eyes. A full transfer occurs many times in the span of a Thetan, but it is not permanent until he enters the body to stay in there from there on. In doing a dead, a Thetan catches the sorrow waves of the body he is wronging, feels sorry for it, and then, for one reason or another, merges into it. This is a temporary transfer, but after a few of these he will become obsessed with being the monitor of a mest body and will devote all his time to it. Then he will suppose that his only method of perceiving is through mest perceptics, his only method of emoting is through mest emotions. And he comes way on down the scale, becomes a servant, feels so degraded that he is himself nothing and the mest body everything, and so tends it continually. Eventually, he will merge with it in a permanent transfer, and that is probably the end of the Thetan. The genetic entity and company thereafter perhaps running from within, perhaps in the next life being picked up by a new Thetan. Thetans are continually being pumped into the mest line. They do not last very long. The I of the individual is the Thetan. The foregoing paragraph contains steps which the auditor must know. This is the cycle he is trying to work out of the case. You will find many conditions occurring in the transfer. There is another type of transfer, the switch transfer, wherein a Thetan, to protect the body he has assumed, changes in sudden moments his control to a person startling or attacking the Thetan's property. This can become very bad and very involved. It happens in families and amongst friends, and when they part or somebody dies, the Thetan is suddenly bereft of some of the property he was controlling, and so carries on as if mest was important. The control transfer is a specialized kind of transfer, wherein the Thetan, having devoted himself to a mest body, now begins to control the environment and other people for his body much as he controls the body. Having forgotten his skills and having many brands of aberration, whereby he will transfer permanently at least some of his control, he yet adventures to reach out energy-wise and start to control other people than his own body and also attempt to control mest objects and motions. He is at first very capable in this, but, having aberrations which cause him to stick on things, his control of the environment becomes too extended. When he loses some of the environment, he conceives that he has lost some of his ability to control. We get then a dwindling of control along all the dynamics throughout the lifetime, until he finally cannot even control all the mest body, but only some small part of it. A Thetan without aberration could safely enter into and control the whole environment, lose widely, and reassume control. A Thetan very aberrated will get restimulated when he loses some control of the environment, and won't thereafter try to control that type of thing or person again. These control transfers and their losses will be found widely in any case and are almost as important as auditing control of the first dynamic. As you run facsimiles, you will find that there are those seen by the pre-clear as though within himself and those seen by the pre-clear as though outside himself. Audit the latter to audit the thetan. Audit the former, and you audit only entities. Confusion of identity is a primary problem with pre-clears. Now that who the pre-clear is can be established and where he is can be seen by the pre-clear as he runs facsimiles, this confusion can be resolved. But do not expect to solve it for the pre-clear rapidly, and do not expect to be right yourself the first time. Technique 88 is an e-meter technique. It can be run without an e-meter, but this permits all manner of dodging and evading. And there are usually 6 or 10 entirely different banks in any pre-clear besides his own. Lots of places to dodge into. The entities all have banks. Now these are either stolen banks from some other thetan long ago, as in borrowing, or they are the identity of this entity. We aren't much interested in auditing entities, except when auditing one can reduce rapidly a physical somatic or physical ill. Easily done, for the entities hold these in present time, and they will audit in present time. A thetan high enough to be outside the body to a normal control distance is not going to hold a facsimile in restimulation just to hurt or injure his body. Only an entity will do this, or a thetan who has transferred all the way into the body, which makes him an entity, and thereafter he will behave like one. No work, high ARC with groups in order to upset them covertly, etc., etc. You will find an understanding of your thetan's goals a little helpful in making sure you are auditing the thetan. He was quite old when he first fixated on the idea of controlling mest bodies. That was not too long ago if he is still operating just outside the body, about arm's length. One of the reasons he fixated on a mest body was because he was terribly bored. There is a considerable liability to being a thetan from the standpoint that one is quite immortal. Even death cycles will look good to a thetan whose aberrations have reduced him down from the goals and hopes he once had. Now he begins to have hopes for a mest body. This body will grow and die, but at least it will change. Aberrations cut this thetan down to a point where he couldn't see any change possible, could not see his own goals would ever be attained. So he fixated on a mest body, became involved in the pure mechanics of operating and caring for one, became more aberrated by contagion from the entities in that body and the uncertainty of life in a mortal being, lost his goals as a mest body, and finally became pretty sordidly sick of the whole thing. Now, magically, you uncover for this thetan 6 or 8 banks full of 70 trillion years or less of incident. The thetan is a wizard at liking to act at being somebody else. That got him into believing he himself was a mest body. Well, it will also get him into believing he is any one of the entity banks you uncover. And he will let you audit these things until doomsday. Vicarious existence, better than a motion picture. But ask this thetan to confront the existence which he shudderingly forsook? Never. It was boring. He's been through all that. He actually knows what happened to him, but it was bad enough to make him wish to forget it, until he forgot it. He'll say he's this entity or that. He'll be happy, in preference to facing his own past, to just go on and perish as a mest body. There are 2 remedies for this. The first is the e-meter. That is an unequaled remedy. You can find out the identity of every bank in the pre-clear and know that the thetan isn't any of them. You can find out the first to last transfers. You can discover the location of every incident the thetan should run. Now, in using the e-meter, you will discover something strange with regard to the thetan. At first, the meter will be much more active on the entities than on the thetan himself. For one thing, the thetan is outside the body. For another, the thetan would rather look over and shove into view incidents he himself has never before seen. He'll help you audit those entities endlessly. People who keep running incidents without any recourse to an e-meter will achieve much with the body, very little with the thetan. Hence, there is no rise in tone, although the auditing hours continue to stretch out. In people who continually self-audit without direction, the thetan is just being very propitiative toward mest bodies and is giving the entities a wonderful workout. The body gets better sometimes. The thetan never gets better, and he is I. The behavior of the thetan in the past was often copied after something he took from the entities. He found an entity role would restimulate. He became the actor and performed the role. He left his own bank alone and neglected, although there were aberrations to dramatize there, too. And by the way, you will find the thetan occasionally trying to stop the body from dramatizing out of entity banks. The thetan bank, the one you want, will give you less active needle response than the entity banks when you first start auditing. This is a sort of negative sorting, but you may have to audit an entity or two because of the way the entity has the body stuck on the track. The point is to find the thetan bank and audit it. The conflict in this person derives from the ambitions of the thetan being balked by the laziness and stupidity and desire for death and destruction on the part of the entities. You can audit any side of this conflict you want, but by simply making the thetan sufficiently strong, the entities become cowed and won't act up, or even drop out and leave. The other answer is to clean up present life with attention to all transfers in it, all switch transfers, all control transfers. Audit the thetan handling the body until you have the current life well up. This does not take very long with Technique 80. You will find that you will have to start by giving the pre-clear a drill to locate where the thetan is. Simply run him up and down the track through various incidents with good attention to a tension unit running, each time locating the thetan outside the body and handling it. The pre-clear will get a dim concept of the handling, but he will get a good concept of the location of the thetan. Now, in the current lifetime, locate the thetan being distracted from his task by noises or arguments in the environment. Run the sympathy of the thetan for the body, the refusal of the thetan to feel sympathy at times. And run in particular antagonisms or angers from the body at other bodies, from the other bodies at the thetan's body. Get all the dead-dead-ex computations out of the way, and then audit the thetan entrance somewhere around the time of birth. It isn't an entrance, it's a possession of the motor controls. When you have this thetan in good shape for this lifetime, he will be strong enough, usually, to tackle nips, blanketings, borrowings. But don't be amazed when you run your first of these to find that the thetan has been using an entity bank. Any borrowing, however, is good to run. Any blanketing on the second dynamic shows your pre-clear once and for all that he is a theta being without a body by showing him an incident to that effect. If the case is incapable of finding the thetan in current life, then take the youngest entity and audit it. It generally is the thetan, but transferred inside the body. How long it will take you to audit a pre-clear to theta clear, one cannot say. The root reaches high very quickly. Using this know-how and 80, you will attain a mest clear in a very short time. Aside from inaccessible persons and psychotics in general, most cases should become mest clear in a few weeks of hard auditing. A step-by-step breakdown of 88. Suggested routine. Symbological processing on current life until pre-clear is well in present time. Return pre-clear to incidents where the thetan can be located as outside and in good control of the body and run such incidents to orient pre-clear. In absence of an outside thetan, audit pre-clear through failures to control self. Use an E-meter to locate youngest entity, newest bank in the body, and audit its effort to control body. Then audit any transfer you can find. Then audit blanketings until pre-clear finds thetan is without a body. Where thetan is outside where he belongs, audit pre-clear in current life through any and all deads and dead-exes and degraders. Audit all present life transfers of the thetan, all switch and control transfers that can be found. Run off all incidents in present life where thetan and body create boil-off. Don't be surprised at thetan visios. You're auditing theta, not mest perception. In-scan and outscan thetan through present life. This makes mest clear. With E-meter, locate first implant about having facsimiles in thetan. Audit it. Locate first borrowings. Audit them. Locate first blanketings. Audit them. Locate deads and dead-exes of thetan and audit them. Locate each and every transfer on track. Audit them. The thetan concentrates on the body. He is usually about arm's length from the body, concentrating on the body. When he is not concentrating on the body, there is a disturbance in the area, and the thetan is being distracted to another body or object. These distractions are important to audit. Don't ask your pre-clear to get any other visio on the scene than the visio of the body the thetan is manipulating. This is the usual thetan position and only interest. Don't be dissuaded that the pre-clear is not the thetan. That he thinks he is not is the aberration. The most fixative emotions are resentment, antagonism, and anger. These tend to fix the thetan on the body. They confirm a transfer as permanent. The thetan's aberration toward the body is to want things to seem real to the thetan via the body. Actually, the thetan should feel at least a little remote and detached, as though he weren't quite present. This detachment will increase as auditing continues, to the great benefit of the intelligence and ability. The pre-clear gets better the thetan gets, and that is all the better the pre-clear can get. Supplement. Additional Incidents on the Theta Line. August 1952. This supplement of additional incidents includes discoveries subsequent to initial publication of History of Man, and contains further breakthroughs in technology as described in the book Scientology 880. Editor. Glare fights. Early on the track, two thetans quite often went into contest with each other to glare each other down. There was a considerable output of electrical energy, and in the interchange one of the thetans was of course driven into apathy. These incidents are audited simply by following the flow of energy and collecting out of it its beauty and ugliness and the pre-clear's agreement, disagreement, communication, no communication, affinity and unaffinity for the beauty and ugliness contained in these flows. Mirrors. A common protection used by beings against thetans was a mirror. The thetan would send a stream of energy at the being carrying the mirror, and the stream of energy would, of course, be directed straight back at the thetan, so he would be in the strange position of glaring at himself. Exploding facsimiles. In blanketings, one of the most serious points is the fact that death facsimiles can explode. Death shock is well known to produce a heavy electronic output from beings. This output can be so sudden that any facsimiles suspended in present time are fed so many attention units so quickly that the facsimile can be said to explode. A person being blanketed, if he dies, feeds out a considerable electronic shock which explodes those facsimiles he has in suspension. The thetan, blanketing him, starts to get off, feels the expansion of the shock, clamps down on the being, and completes, one might say, the demolition of the facsimiles by adding additional energy into them. This is quite severe and leaves an individual holding a blanketing in fear because of this explosion. People who have anxiety stomachs lose them very rapidly when one runs out blanketings and the explosions of the facsimiles. Implosions. A thetan or any energy can implode as well as explode. This is the effect of a retractor factor present in electrical energy. Instead of exploding and blowing out into a larger sphere, the energy implodes and draws into a much smaller area with the same suddenness that it would explode. To run this, it is only necessary to put one's attention on the center of the implosion, and then, alternately, get the effort to draw off from the sphere of implosion. Putting one's attention on the center and then trying to draw off, and on the center and trying to draw off again, will run out an implosion. The capper. This is a very early incident on the track and consists of a thetan being crowned with an electronic cap through which energy pours. It is an initial effort to make him have facsimiles and to derange his self-determinism. The prover. Here one has a thetan approaching a group of thetans. The group demands that the new thetan prove something. The moment he starts to prove it, the whole group invalidates him. This causes him to go rapidly down the tone scale in an effort to prove that he knows. He then may become part of the group, and in playing this game on other new thetans who approach, eventually may become at odds with the group and be rejected from the group. The prover is located by getting the beauty or ugliness of trying to prove something to somebody, and others trying to prove things to oneself. The Iron Maiden. This is a relatively recent incident, happening only 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. It consists of a shell, not unlike the Iron Maiden used in the Middle Ages. The Thetan is pulled into this shell, and it is closed on him. He furnishes the bulk of energy in the shell. The shell is highly magnetic, and extra energy is fed to it. On the right half, one ordinarily gets a vertical flow. Simultaneously, on the left half, one ordinarily gets horizontal flow. These two flows, going on in different directions at the same time, can cause considerable confusion and are the basic reasons why the left sides and right sides will not run out at the same time. This incident is quite hidden on the E-meter, showing up simply as a stuck needle. The entire motive of this incident is hiding, fear of discovery, shrinking into oneself, and so forth, as an effort to get away from the confusing flows of the shell itself. It is run as to locks by hiding things from others and others hiding things from self. There are sexual and religious connotations in this incident. It also seems to divide a person into male and female gender, one on the left and one on the right, and makes one think he must be dual to survive. This is also found as a factor in other incidents. Theta trap posts. Peculiarly aberrative are theta trap posts. This is the basic of one having a body. It ordinarily happened very early on the track. A single post is set up, sometimes in a cave or in a place a Thetan might have been known to inhabit. The post itself has no electrical current in it. All electrical current in this incident is furnished by the Thetan himself. The post is simply a large magnet. The Thetan, when he first senses this post, feels it drawing him toward it. This is because of his own electrical energy. He fights back against this post, and the harder he fights the post, the closer he comes to it, until at last he blankets the post. Probably this method of trapping Thetans was invented out of rancor for the activity of Thetans in blanketing, and a magnet is given the Thetan to blanket. Thereafter, every time any energy flows through this Thetan on the post picks up the energy and flows it back up inside him. Other beings of a lower order may come up and discharge weapons at him or antagonize him so that he will throw a current out at them. Each time he does, he gets the current himself. This is probably a basic on the overt act phenomenon, and at least exaggerates it. Thetans have spent anything from 5 days up to 100 years on such posts before being taken off them. The Thetan eventually learns to control his output and input in such a way as not to use any electrical energy. Later, when he gets on a body, this incident may go into restimulation, and thereafter he is afraid to get angry at anyone. And when he does, he feels the kickback of the facsimile against himself. This is a relatively simple incident to run, particularly with beauty and ugliness in all the flows, but it is rather long. The parody. There is an early incident on the track called the parody. A Thetan is made to sit opposite an image like himself, and a metallic beam, or actually a piece of metal, is put in his mouth and in the mouth of the being opposite him. Any activity thereafter causes an interchange of energy and confirms the overt act phenomenon. This is peculiarly restimulated by marriage. Auditing. In auditing, one audits, according to 880, see the book Scientology 880, the high aesthetic wave only. This is present in every incident to a marked degree, the white representing beauty, the black representing ugliness. The Iron Maiden is an exception to this. The Iron Maiden flows gray rapidly as the Thetan withdraws into himself so tightly. Therefore, only a gray is present afterwards. Assignment of responsibility in any incident is the most important factor in the incident, since this assignment of responsibility to somebody else for causing the incident puts the incident itself out of the control of the person having the facsimile. As a person assigns responsibility to others, he assigns at the same time to them the control for his facsimiles. Thus, he loses control of the facsimiles, claims he does not own them, loses all memory and connection with them, and they can thereafter own and run him. The whole sequence of aberration is at first being self-determined, then being hit hard enough by force to have a new determination entered into one which is not his, but which he would use thereafter as his own. This gradual shift and change of determination, other than one's own determination, brings about a highly aberrated condition in the long run and makes it difficult for a person to sort out where he is actually caught. In order to get a pre-clear off a body or to detach him from bodies, Technique 880 is used with particular attention to the assignment of responsibility. For the pre-clear has assigned responsibility to the body so long and so often, has assigned responsibility to bodies in general to such a degree that he thinks that he himself is nothing. When the body dies, he thinks memories die of that body, which is not the case. This is the occlusion on the past.